Trust me, these stories are going to stick with you long after the video ends. Our first story comes from someone who learned that friendship doesn't always mean what you think it means. My friend cancelled plans last minute, but still posted party pics online. I had been looking forward to hanging out with my friend Lila for weeks. We'd made these plans about a month ago to have a girls' night at my apartment. Nothing fancy, just ordering takeout, watching movies and catching up since we'd both been super busy with work and hadn't seen each other in forever. The day of our hangout, I spent the morning cleaning my apartment and went grocery shopping for snacks. I even picked up her favourite wine from this boutique place across town because I wanted everything to be perfect. Around 3 in the afternoon, I texted her asking what time she wanted to come over and if there was anything specific she wanted to watch. She didn't respond for a couple hours, which wasn't unusual since she's not great with her phone. But around 6 p.m, just 2 hours before she was supposed to come over, she finally texted back. The message just said, "Hey girl, I'm so sorry, but I'm absolutely exhausted from work this week. I don't think I can make it tonight." Rain check? I was disappointed, but I understood. Work had been crazy for both of us lately, and sometimes you just need to rest. I told her no worries, and that we'd reschedule soon. I ended up having a quiet night in by myself, which was fine, even though I'd been really looking forward to seeing her. The next morning, I was scrolling through Instagram while having my coffee, and that's when I saw it. Lila had posted a whole series of stories from the night before. She was at some rooftop bar downtown with a group of people I didn't recognize, all dressed up and looking like she was having the time of her life. The timestamp on the first story was 7:30 p.m, which was exactly when she was supposed to be at my place. I kept watching her stories and there were like 15 of them spanning from 7:30 until almost 2 in the morning. She was definitely not at home resting like she told me. She was out partying, posting videos of herself dancing, taking shots and laughing with these new people. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. It wasn't just that she'd cancelled our plans, it was that she'd lied about why. If she'd just told me something else came up, or that she wanted to go to this other event instead, I would have been disappointed, but I would have understood. People change their minds, things happen, priorities shift. But lying to me and making up this story about being too tired when she clearly had plenty of energy for a night out with other people, that hurt. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront her about it? Should I just let it go? I kept going back and forth in my head about whether I was overreacting. Maybe she'd gotten a last-minute invitation after she'd already told me she was tired, and she just didn't know how to explain that without hurting my feelings. But the more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. There had been other occasions where Lila had cancelled on me, but then I'd see her out doing other things on social media. I'd always given her the benefit of the doubt before, but this felt different. The lie was so specific and unnecessary. A few days later, she texted me like nothing had happened, asking if I wanted to grab lunch that weekend. I didn't respond right away because I was still processing everything. When I finally did text back, I kept it short and said I was busy that weekend. She must have sensed something was off because she called me the next day. When I answered, she immediately started talking about how crazy her week had been and how she'd barely left her apartment. She was still maintaining the story that she'd spent that night resting at home, even though her Instagram told a completely different story. I couldn't take it anymore. I asked her directly about the Instagram posts from that night. There was this long pause and then she got defensive. She said she'd originally planned to stay home, but then her co-worker had invited her out last minute and she'd felt obligated to go because it was for someone's birthday. She said she didn't want to hurt my feelings by telling me she'd chosen someone else's plans over ours. But that explanation just made it worse. She'd had multiple opportunities to be honest with me. She could have told me the truth when she first cancelled, or when I saw her posts, or when she called me. Instead, she'd kept lying until I directly confronted her with evidence. The whole situation made me realise that maybe our friendship wasn't as important to her as it was to me. If it was, she would have been honest about what happened, Or she would have chosen our long-standing plans over a last-minute invitation from co-workers. We haven't hung out since then. She's texted a few times suggesting we get together, but I always find an excuse. I know I probably should have a real conversation with her about how her actions made me feel, but honestly, I'm not sure I want to put that much effort into salvaging something with someone who clearly doesn't value my time or our friendship enough to be truthful with me. That story ends there. The casual cruelty of lying about being too tired while simultaneously posting your night out for everyone to see is next level thoughtless. Some people really think social media exists in a separate universe from their real relationships. The worst part is, she kept lying even when directly confronted with the evidence. Our next story comes from someone who discovered that family gatherings can bring out the worst in people. My sister tried to take my birthday money. Last weekend was my birthday, and like every year, my family gathered at my parents' house for dinner and cake. It's always been a nice tradition, nothing too elaborate, just good food and spending time together. My grandmother, who's 89 and still sharp as a tack, always gives the grandchildren money for their birthdays. It's been her thing for as long as I can remember. This year, my grandmother handed me an envelope during dessert, like she always does. She gave me a hug and said happy birthday, and I tucked the envelope into my jacket pocket to open later. I've always preferred to open birthday money privately, rather than in front of everyone. It just feels more personal that way. My sister Ethan was sitting right next to me when this happened. She's 2 years younger than me and has always been a bit competitive, but we generally get along well. After dinner, while everyone was still sitting around talking, I went to the bathroom, and when I came back I noticed my jacket wasn't where I'd left it. I found it hanging on a chair in the living room, and when I reached into the pocket for my envelope, it was gone. I started looking around, thinking maybe it had fallen out, but I couldn't find it anywhere. I was starting to panic a little because losing a birthday gift from my grandmother would be terrible. That's when I saw Ethan sitting on the couch with an opened envelope in her hands, counting bills. I walked over and asked if that was my birthday money from Grandma. She looked up at me with this innocent expression and said, "Oh, this? Grandma said it was for both of us." I was confused because that had never happened before. Grandma always gives individual gifts, and she'd specifically handed the envelope to me and said happy birthday. I told Ethan that didn't sound right and asked to see the envelope. She handed it over reluctantly, and sure enough, it had my name written on it in my grandmother's handwriting. When I pointed this out, Ethan's story changed. She said maybe Grandma had forgotten to give her money this time, and since we're siblings, I should share it with her. She said it wasn't fair that I got money, and she didn't, especially since her birthday was coming up in a few months anyway. I explained that Grandma only gives money on actual birthdays, not just randomly, and that this was specifically my birthday gift. Ethan got defensive and said I was being selfish and that family should share things. She said she'd already spent some of it in her head, planning what she was going to buy. The whole situation was becoming really uncomfortable. Other family members were starting to notice that we were having some kind of disagreement, and I didn't want to make a scene at my own birthday dinner, but I also couldn't believe that my sister had taken money from my jacket and opened an envelope that clearly had my name on it. I asked her directly when she had taken it from my jacket. She claimed she hadn't taken it from anywhere, that Grandma had given it to her directly. But that was obviously not true, since I'd put it in my pocket myself, and she'd been sitting right there when it happened. My parents noticed the tension and came over to ask what was going on. When I explained the situation, my mum looked disappointed and asked Ethan to give me back the money. My dad just shook his head, like he couldn't believe we were fighting about this. Ethan got upset and said everyone was ganging up on her. She said she didn't understand why I couldn't just share since we're family, and it's not like I needed the money more than she did. She handed me back most of the bills, but claimed she couldn't find one of them, which I'm pretty sure she'd already pocketed. My grandmother, who had been watching this whole exchange from her chair, called Ethan over and asked her quietly what was going on. I couldn't hear their conversation, but afterwards, Grandma looked really sad. She told Ethan that the money was specifically for my birthday and that she'd give Ethan her own gift when her birthday came around. The rest of the evening was awkward. Ethan barely spoke to anyone and left early, claiming she had plans with friends. My parents apologised for her behaviour, but the whole thing had put a damper on what was supposed to be a nice family celebration. What bothered me most wasn't even the money itself, it was the principle. Ethan had gone through my jacket, opened an envelope with my name on it, and then tried to justify keeping it by making up stories and guilt-tripping me about sharing. The fact that she was willing to lie to my face and to our grandmother about what had happened showed a side of her I'd never seen before. A few days later, she texted me a half-hearted apology, saying she was sorry things got weird at my birthday. But she never actually acknowledged that what she did was wrong, or that she'd lied about how she got the money. She just said she was sorry for the misunderstanding, like it was some kind of innocent mix-up, instead of her deliberately taking something that didn't belong to her. I haven't really talked to her much since then. It's made me wonder what other boundaries she's willing to cross when she thinks she can get away with it. The whole thing has changed how I see her, and I'm not sure if that's something we can come back from. That story is over. Going through someone's jacket and stealing their birthday money is bad enough, but the elaborate web of lies to justify it makes it so much worse. The fact that she tried to drag their grandmother into her deception shows just how far some people will go to avoid taking responsibility for their actions. Our next story involves someone who learned that gift giving can reveal uncomfortable truths about relationships. My partner criticizes every gift I give them. I've been with my partner Renee for about 8 months now, and I thought things were going really well between us. We have great chemistry, similar interests, and generally enjoy spending time together. But there's this one issue that's been eating away at me, and I'm starting to think it might be a bigger problem than I initially realised. Renee criticises every single gift I give them. Not just casual criticism, but harsh personal attacks that make me feel like I don't know them at all, which is exactly what they tell me every time. The first time it happened was about 3 months into our relationship. It was their birthday, and I'd put a lot of thought into getting them something meaningful. I knew they loved reading, so I got them a beautiful hardcover edition of their favourite book, plus a really nice bookmark that had been handcrafted by a local artist. I thought it was perfect. When they opened it, their face just fell. They looked at the book for a moment and then said, "This is nice, I guess, but I already have this book, and I don't really use bookmarks because I fold the page corners." Then they looked at me with this disappointed expression and said, "You don't really know me at all, do you?" I was crushed. I apologised and said I'd return it and get them something else, but they said not to bother because I'd probably just get that wrong too. The rest of their birthday was tense and uncomfortable. I thought maybe it was just a fluke, that I genuinely missed the mark and needed to pay better attention. So for our 6-month anniversary, I tried a completely different approach. Renee had mentioned loving this specific type of artisanal chocolate that they'd had once at a fancy restaurant. I spent weeks tracking down where to buy it and ended up paying way more than I could really afford to get them a selection box. Their reaction was even worse than the first time. They said the chocolates were too rich and that they preferred milk chocolate to dark chocolate, even though I was sure they'd specifically mentioned loving dark chocolate. Then came the same refrain. "You clearly don't know me at all. How can we be together if you don't even understand my basic preferences?" I started keeping notes after that, trying to track everything they mentioned liking or wanting. When they casually mentioned their coffee mug collection, I found a unique vintage mug from the 1960s that fit their aesthetic perfectly. When they complained about their old headphones, I researched for hours to find the exact brand and model that reviewers said had the best sound quality in their price range. Every single gift was met with the same response. The mug was too small and not really their style after all. The headphones were too bulky and made their ears hurt. Each time, I got the same lecture about how I didn't understand them and how disappointing it was that someone they cared about couldn't pick out a simple gift that they'd actually like. The The worst incident happened last month. Renee had been stressed about work and mentioned multiple times how they wished they could just relax and unwind. They'd specifically talked about wanting to try aromatherapy and how they thought bath bombs might help them de-stress. I bought them a luxury bath set with different scented bath bombs, bath salts, and a really soft towel. When I gave it to them, they were quiet for a long time. Then they said, "I can't believe you think I'm the type of person who takes baths. I'm a shower person. I've always been a shower person. This is exactly what I mean when I say you don't listen to me or pay attention to who I am." But the thing is, they'd literally talked about wanting to try baths as a way to relax. I even reminded them of that conversation, and they said I must have misunderstood what they were saying. They said I was always twisting their words to justify my bad gift choices. At this point, I started wondering if I was losing my mind. I began recording some of our conversations on my phone, just to make sure I wasn't misremembering things. And I wasn't. Renee would express interest in something, I'd get it for them, and then they'd act like they'd never wanted it in the first place. The breaking point came 2 weeks ago, when I didn't get them anything for a minor milestone in their career. They got angry and said I didn't care about their achievements and that a good partner would have gotten them something to celebrate. So I went out the next day and bought them a nice bottle of wine and a card congratulating them on their success. Their response was to roll their eyes and say, "Great, more proof that you don't know me. I don't even drink wine that often and this card is so generic. You clearly just grabbed the first thing you saw at the store." Then they added, "At this point, I'd rather you just not get me anything at all since you're obviously incapable of choosing something I'd actually want." That's when something clicked for me. This wasn't about the gifts at all. Renee was using my gift giving as a weapon to make me feel inadequate and insecure in our relationship. Every present became an opportunity for them to tell me I didn't understand them, didn't know them, wasn't trying hard enough. I realized that no matter what I gave them, it would be wrong. If I got them something practical, it wasn't thoughtful enough. If I got them something sentimental, it was too cheesy. If I spent a lot of money, I was being wasteful. If I didn't spend much, I was being cheap. The criticism wasn't about the actual gifts, it was about maintaining power and control in our relationship. Now I'm questioning everything else about how Renee treats me. Do they criticize other things I do with the same pattern? Are there other areas where they move the goalposts so I can never succeed? The more I think about it, the more I realize that this gift thing might just be the most obvious example of a much bigger problem. I haven't bought them anything in 2 weeks and they haven't mentioned it. Part of me wonders if they're relieved not to have to come up with new ways to tear down my efforts, but I'm also realizing that I'm walking on eggshells in other parts of our relationship too, always worried that anything I do will be met with that same disappointed expression and the same message that I don't really know them. That story ends there. Using gift giving as a systematic way to undermine someone's confidence is psychological manipulation at its finest. The moving goalposts and contradictory complaints make it impossible to succeed, which is exactly the point. When someone consistently tells you that you don't know them while refusing to give you any way to actually learn, they're not interested in connection. Our next story comes from someone who discovered that academic integrity means nothing to some family members. My cousin used my college essay for their own application. I spent months working on my college application essays last year. The personal statement was especially important to me because it was about overcoming my fear of public speaking through joining the debate team. I wrote about how terrifying it was to stand up in front of people for the first time, how my voice would shake, and how I gradually built confidence through practice and determination. It was deeply personal, talking about my social anxiety and how debate changed my entire outlook on communication. I went through probably 15 drafts, working with my English teacher to get the tone just right. The essay felt like it captured something essential about who I am and how I've grown as a person. My cousin Hugo is a year younger than me, so he was going through the application process this year. We're pretty close, and our families get together regularly for holidays and birthdays. When he mentioned he was struggling with his personal statement, I offered to let him read mine for inspiration, thinking it might help him brainstorm topics or understand the format better. I sent it to him over email with a note saying he could use it as a reference for structure and tone, but obviously he'd need to write about his own experiences. I figured it would be helpful for him to see what a completed essay looked like, since the whole process can be overwhelming. A few weeks later, my aunt mentioned at Sunday dinner how proud she was of Hugo's essay about overcoming his fear of public speaking through debate. My stomach dropped. I asked her what she meant, and she started describing my exact essay, almost word for word. She talked about how moving it was to read about Hugo's voice shaking during his first debate, and how he'd grown so much through the experience. But Hugo has never been on the debate team. He's actually pretty outgoing, and has never had issues with public speaking. If anything, he's the type of person who volunteers to give presentations. I confronted Hugo about it privately later that day. At first he tried to deny it, saying we must have had similar experiences. But when I pressed him about specific details from the essay, he finally admitted that he'd used parts of mine as inspiration. When I asked to see what he'd written, it became clear that he hadn't just used it for inspiration. He'd copied entire paragraphs, changing only small details. Where I wrote about joining debate as a sophomore, he wrote about joining as a junior. Where I mentioned a specific tournament, he changed the name but kept everything else identical. The most frustrating part was that he'd kept all the emotional content that was specific to my experience. He wrote about having panic attacks before speaking, which has never happened to him. He included details about working with a speech therapist, something I'd done, but he never had. He even kept the part about my grandmother encouraging me to find my voice, just changing it to his grandmother. It wasn't just plagiarism, it was identity theft. He'd taken my personal growth story and claimed it as his own for college applications. These essays are supposed to show admissions officers who you are as a person, and Hugo was presenting himself as me. When I told him he needed to rewrite it completely, he got defensive. He said I was being dramatic and that lots of people get help with their essays. He claimed that since I'd given it to him to read, I'd basically given him permission to use it. He said families should help each other, and that I was being selfish for not wanting him to succeed. I explained that there's a difference between helping someone brainstorm and literally giving them your work to copy. I told him that what he'd done was academic dishonesty, and that he could get in serious trouble if anyone discovered it. But he brushed off my concerns and said no one would ever find out. The worst part is that he'd already submitted applications to 3 schools using my essay. When I suggested he contact them to withdraw and resubmit with his own work, he refused. He said it was too late and that he wasn't going to sabotage his chances of getting into college over what he called a technicality. I was torn about what to do. On one hand, Hugo is family, and I didn't want to ruin his college prospects. On the other hand, he'd stolen my work and was using it to gain admission to schools under false pretenses. It felt deeply unfair that he might get accepted somewhere based on my experiences and my writing. I ended up telling my parents about the situation, hoping they could talk sense into him. But when they approached Hugo and his parents, his family defended his actions. His mum said that since we're cousins, sharing essays was just helping each other out. His dad said that all the best students get help with their applications, and that I was being jealous of Hugo's success. The whole thing has created a rift in our extended family. Hugo got into his first choice school and acts like nothing happened. Meanwhile, I feel like my personal story has been stolen and commodified. Every time someone congratulates Hugo on his moving essay about overcoming his fear of public speaking, I feel sick to my stomach. What bothers me most is that Hugo had plenty of his own experiences he could have written about. He's travelled internationally, he's an accomplished musician, he volunteers regularly at a food bank. He had material for a genuine, compelling essay, but he chose to steal mine instead because it was easier. That story ends there. Taking someone's deeply personal essay and passing it off as your own isn't just plagiarism, it's emotional theft. The fact that his family defended it as helping each other out shows where he learned that other people's work is fair game. Some boundaries shouldn't need to be explained. Our next story comes from someone who learned that party etiquette is apparently optional for some people. My friend took over my Spotify playlist at a party. Last weekend, I was hosting a small get-together at my apartment for about 15 people. Nothing crazy, just some friends hanging out, having drinks and enjoying each other's company. I'd spent a good amount of time putting together the perfect playlist for the evening, mixing different genres and energy levels to keep the vibe just right. I had my phone connected to my Bluetooth speaker, and the music was flowing perfectly. People were dancing, singing along, and the atmosphere was exactly what I'd hoped for. The playlist was carefully curated to build energy throughout the night, starting with some chill background music during dinner and gradually moving into more upbeat songs as people loosened up. My friend Clara had arrived about an hour into the party and seemed to be having a great time. She was dancing and seemed to really enjoy the music selection. But about 2 hours in, right in the middle of a song that everyone was singing along to, the music suddenly stopped. I looked over and saw Clara holding my phone, which she'd unplugged from the speaker without asking. Before I could say anything, she'd already connected her own phone and started playing music from her Spotify account. The song she put on was completely different from what we'd been listening to, much more aggressive, and not really fitting the mood of the party. I walked over and politely asked her what she was doing. She said the music was getting boring, and that she wanted to spice things up with some songs from her own playlist. She said it like she was doing everyone a favour, as if the music I'd chosen wasn't good enough for my own party. I explained that I'd put a lot of thought into the playlist and asked if she could please give me back my phone so I could continue with what I'd planned. She rolled her eyes and said I was being too controlling, that parties are supposed to be collaborative, and that everyone should get to contribute to the music. But here's the thing, she didn't ask if she could add some songs or suggest we take turns controlling the music. She just took over completely without any discussion, and the music she was playing was really not working for the crowd. People had stopped dancing and were starting to look confused about the sudden genre shift. I tried to compromise by suggesting we could alternate between our playlists, or that she could queue up some songs to play after mine finished. But Clara wasn't interested in sharing control. She said her music was better, and that people would appreciate the change once they got used to it. The problem was that people clearly weren't getting used to it. The energy in the room had completely shifted. Conversations had gotten quieter, fewer people were dancing, and I could see some of my guests looking at me like they were wondering why the music had gotten so weird. After about 20 minutes of Clara's music, one of my other friends came up to me and quietly asked if I could change it back to what we'd been listening to before. She said the new music was giving her a headache and that several people had asked her to talk to me about it. I approached Clara again and explained that the music really wasn't working for the crowd and asked if we could switch back to my playlist. She got defensive and said that people just needed time to adjust to something different. She claimed that my music was too mainstream and that she was exposing everyone to better artists. The whole situation was becoming really uncomfortable. I didn't want to make a scene at my own party, but I also couldn't let Clara continue to control the atmosphere of my event with music that was clearly not working. Some of my guests were starting to look like they were considering leaving. Finally, I just walked over to the speaker and disconnected her phone. I told her that I appreciated her wanting to contribute, but as the host I needed to make sure everyone was having a good time and the music she'd chosen wasn't working for this particular crowd. Clara got angry and accused me of being a control freak. She said I was ruining the party by being so rigid about the music, and that I clearly didn't trust my friends to make good choices. She said she was just trying to help make the party better, and that I was being ungrateful. I reconnected my phone and went back to my original playlist. The change in the room was immediate. People started dancing again, Conversations became more animated, and the whole energy lifted back up to where it had been before Clara's takeover. But Clara spent the rest of the party sulking in the corner and barely talking to anyone. She left early without saying goodbye, and I could tell she was still angry about the music situation. The whole thing cast a shadow over what should have been a fun evening. The next day, she sent me a long text message about how disappointed she was in my behaviour. She said I'd embarrassed her in front of everyone, and that I'd shown I didn't value her input or friendship. She claimed that good hosts are supposed to make all their guests feel included, and that by rejecting her music choices, I'd made her feel unwelcome. I tried to explain that it wasn't personal, that I just needed to consider what was best for the entire group, but she wasn't interested in hearing my perspective. She said that if I was going to be so controlling about every aspect of my parties, maybe she wouldn't come to future ones. That story is over. Taking over someone's carefully planned playlist without asking is like rearranging their furniture while you're visiting. The host put thought into creating a specific atmosphere, and hijacking that shows a complete disregard for their effort and judgment. When multiple guests are asking you to change it back, maybe it's time to accept that your music isn't hitting the mark. Our next story involves someone who learned that family members don't always respect the concept of a private moment. My brother crashed my date by showing up at the restaurant. I'd been talking to this person I met through a mutual friend for about 3 weeks, and we'd finally decided to meet up for dinner. I was really excited about it because our conversations had been great, and I felt like there was genuine potential for something meaningful between us. I chose this nice Italian restaurant downtown that I'd been to before and knew had a good atmosphere for conversation. It wasn't too loud, the lighting was warm and comfortable, and the food was excellent. I made a reservation for 7 o'clock on a Friday night and had been looking forward to it all week. My date arrived exactly on time, which I appreciated, and we were seated at a lovely table near the window. The conversation started flowing naturally, and I was feeling really good about how things were going. We ordered appetizers and were laughing about some story they were telling when I noticed someone walking toward our table. It was my brother Jonah. He was grinning and waving like he'd just randomly bumped into us, but something about the timing felt off. Our restaurant was across town from where he lived, and it wasn't exactly on his usual route for anything. "Oh wow, what a coincidence," he said, pulling out the empty chair at our table without being invited to sit down. "I was just grabbing dinner by myself and saw you guys over here. Mind if I join you for a minute?" I was mortified. This was clearly a first date, and having my brother suddenly appear and insert himself into the situation was beyond awkward. I tried to give him subtle signals that this wasn't a good time, but he either didn't notice or chose to ignore them. My date was polite about it, probably because they didn't want to seem rude, but I could tell they were confused about what was happening. They kept looking between Jonah and me, like they were trying to figure out if this was something I'd planned. "I actually had no idea this place existed until today," Jonah continued, settling into the chair like he planned to stay for the entire meal. "Someone at work recommended it, so I thought I'd check it out. The menu looks great." But here's the thing that made me suspicious. This restaurant had been our family's go-to place for special occasions for years. Jonah had been here dozens of times for birthdays, anniversaries, graduation dinners, you name it. There was no way he'd just randomly discovered it that day. I asked him directly what he was really doing there. He stuck to his story about getting a recommendation from a co-worker. But when I pressed him about which co-worker and when they told him about it, his answers got vague and contradictory. The worst part was that he showed no signs of leaving. He ordered his own meal and started asking my date all these personal questions, like he was conducting some kind of interview. "So what do you do for work? How long have you lived in the city? How did you meet my sister?" My date was handling it gracefully, but I could see they were getting increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. This was supposed to be our chance to get to know each other in a relaxed setting, not a family interrogation session. I finally excused myself to go to the bathroom and texted Jonah to meet me by the restrooms. When he came over, I asked him what he was really doing there and why he was crashing my date. That's when he admitted that our mum had told him about the date and where we were going. She'd apparently been worried about me meeting someone new and had asked Jonah to, coincidentally, show up to make sure I was safe. I was furious. First of all, I'm an adult who can handle my own dating life. Second, even if they were genuinely concerned about my safety, there were so many better ways to handle that than having my brother pretend to randomly appear at our table. When I told Jonah he needed to leave immediately, he got defensive. He said he was just looking out for me and that I should be grateful to have family who cared about my well-being. He said the person seemed nice enough, so I should be happy that he was giving his approval. I explained that his approval wasn't needed or wanted, and that he'd completely disrupted what was supposed to be a private evening. But he seemed to think the whole situation was funny, rather than understanding why I was upset. By the time we got back to the table, the mood had completely shifted. My date was checking their phone and seemed ready to leave. We finished our meal quickly, with Jonah still sitting there, making small talk like nothing was wrong. When we left the restaurant, my date thanked me for dinner, but said they had an early morning and needed to get home. I could tell they weren't interested in extending the evening, and honestly, I couldn't blame them. Jonah followed us outside and actually had the nerve to ask if we wanted to grab drinks somewhere else. When I firmly told him no, he shrugged and said he'd see me at home, making it obvious to my date that we lived in the same building. The whole thing was humiliating. I texted an apology to my date the next day, explaining that Jonah's appearance hadn't been planned, and that I was sorry about how weird the evening had gotten. They were polite in their response, but said they were pretty busy with work for the next few weeks. We never went on a second date, and I'm pretty sure Jonah's interference was a major factor in that decision. That story is over. Nothing kills romance faster than an uninvited family member conducting their own background check at your dinner table. The fact that their mum orchestrated the whole thing makes it even worse. Some people really think being protective justifies sabotaging your personal life. Our next story comes from someone who discovered that friendship sometimes comes with invisible prerequisites. My friend forgot to invite me to their game night again. For the past year, my friend Kai has been hosting weekly game nights at their apartment. It started as just a casual thing with a few people, but it's grown into this regular social event that everyone in our friend group looks forward to. I found out about these game nights accidentally about 6 months ago when I saw photos on Instagram of all my friends playing board games together. In the pictures, I could see people I hang out with regularly, all gathered around Kai's dining table with pizza boxes and drinks, clearly having a great time. When I asked Kai about it the next day, they seemed surprised that I didn't know about the game nights. They said it had just been a spur-of-the-moment thing, and that they'd texted a few people who happened to be free that night. They apologised for not thinking to invite me, and said I should definitely come to the next one. But the next week came and went, and I didn't get an invitation. When I saw more photos posted online, I reached out to Kai again. This time, they said they'd forgotten to send me the details because they'd been rushing to get everything set up. They promised to add me to their group chat where they coordinated the weekly plans. I never got added to any group chat. Week after week, I'd see the same photos of the same people having these elaborate game nights, while I spent my Friday evenings alone, wondering why I kept getting left out. The third time I brought it up, Kai's explanation was different. They said their apartment was pretty small, and they could only fit a certain number of people comfortably. They said it wasn't personal, just a space limitation issue. But when I looked at the photos, I could count at least 8 people crammed around their table, and I knew their apartment wasn't smaller than mine. I started paying closer attention to who was getting invited to these game nights. It seemed to be the same core group every week, plus rotating guests. People I barely knew would show up in the photos, but I was still somehow not making the cut for the limited space. The breaking point came last month when I was hanging out with 2 other friends from our group, and they started talking about how excited they were for game night that weekend. They mentioned some new strategy game Kai had bought and how they couldn't wait to try it. I asked if they knew what time it was starting, pretending like I'd also been invited. They looked at each other awkwardly, and then one of them gently asked if I was coming this week. When I said I wasn't sure because I hadn't gotten the details yet, they both got quiet. It became obvious that everyone knew I wasn't actually invited to these things, but no one wanted to say it directly. They knew, Kai knew, probably everyone in our friend group knew that I was being systematically excluded from their weekly social gathering. That weekend I decided to do something I'm not proud of. I drove by Kai's apartment building around the time game night usually started. Sure enough, I could see the lights on in their apartment and shadows of people moving around inside. I sat in my car for a few minutes, feeling pathetic, but also needing to confirm what I already suspected. The next Monday, I confronted Kai directly. I told them I knew about the game night that weekend and asked them to be honest about why I wasn't being invited. I said I could handle the truth, but I couldn't handle being lied to every week. Kai got uncomfortable and said it wasn't anything personal against me. They said some people in the group had mentioned that I could be a little intense during games and that they wanted to keep the atmosphere light and casual. They said they weren't trying to hurt my feelings, but they had to consider what was best for the group dynamic. I asked them what they meant by intense because I genuinely didn't understand what I'd done wrong. They said I had a tendency to take games too seriously and that some people felt uncomfortable when I got competitive. They mentioned a specific incident from months ago when I'd gotten frustrated during a trivia game because my teammates weren't taking it seriously. I remembered that night, and yes, I'd been disappointed that we'd lost because people were more interested in socializing than actually trying to win. But I hadn't yelled at anyone or caused a scene. I'd just expressed that I wished we'd tried harder. Apparently, that one moment of frustration had been enough to get me blacklisted from future game nights. Instead of talking to me about it or giving me a chance to adjust my approach, they'd just decided it was easier to exclude me entirely. What hurt the most was that no one had given me the opportunity to change or improve. They'd made this decision about my character based on one evening and then spent months lying to me about why I wasn't being included. I told Kai that I wished they'd been honest with me from the beginning. If my behaviour was a problem, I would have wanted to know so I could work on it. Instead, they'd let me believe that I was just unlucky with timing or that there were genuine space constraints. Kai apologised and said they'd handle it differently in the future, but the damage was already done. I realised that this friend group had been discussing my personality behind my back and had collectively decided I wasn't worth including in their regular social activities. I stopped reaching out about game nights after that conversation. If they wanted to invite me, they knew how to contact me, but the invitations never came, and I stopped seeing photos of their gatherings on social media. Either they made their posts private or they blocked me from seeing them. The whole experience made me realise that I'd been more invested in these friendships than they were in me. They were perfectly happy to hang out with me occasionally, but when it came to their regular social circle, I wasn't considered part of the inner group. That story is over. Being excluded from regular social events while being fed a steady diet of excuses is social cruelty disguised as politeness. The fact that they spent months discussing their concerns about your personality instead of just talking to you directly shows how little they actually valued the friendship. Our next story involves someone who learned that family members don't always understand the concept of consent when it comes to sharing memories. My aunt posted an embarrassing childhood photo of me without asking. Last week I was scrolling through Facebook during my lunch break when I saw a notification that I'd been tagged in a post. I clicked on it and nearly choked on my sandwich. My Aunt Ivy had posted the most mortifying photo from my childhood, and not only had she tagged me, but she'd made it public for all her friends to see. The photo was from when I was about 7 years old, taken at a family pool party. I was crying because I'd just had an accident in the pool, and you could see the obvious wet spot spreading through my bathing suit. My face was red and splotchy from crying. My hair was a mess, and I looked absolutely miserable. The caption read, "Found this old gem while going through photo albums. Remember this pool party, sweetie? You were so embarrassed, but it was honestly adorable. Kids are so funny." Throwback Thursday. Family memories. So cute. I was horrified. This was not a cute childhood memory to me. It was one of the most embarrassing moments of my early years, something I'd hoped everyone had forgotten about. And now it was posted publicly on Facebook with multiple laughing emoji reactions from people I didn't even know. Within an hour, the post had gotten several comments from Ivy's friends, all talking about how precious and hilarious the photo was. Some of them were sharing their own embarrassing kid stories in the comments, turning my humiliation into entertainment for strangers. I immediately messaged Ivy asking her to take down the post. I explained that the photo was embarrassing to me and that I wasn't comfortable having it shared publicly. I tried to be polite about it, just asking her to please remove it and maybe check with me before posting pictures of me in the future. Her response was dismissive. She said I was being too sensitive and that it was just a harmless childhood photo. She said family photos were meant to be shared and that I should be able to laugh at myself. She added several crying, laughing emojis to her message, like the whole thing was ridiculous. I explained that I understood she thought it was funny, but that I genuinely felt uncomfortable having that particular moment shared with people I didn't know. I asked again if she could please just delete the post. Ivy replied that she'd already gotten so many sweet comments from her friends, and that it would be rude to delete it now. She said her friends were enjoying the post and sharing their own memories, and that taking it down would disappoint them. She told me I needed to learn to be less uptight about things. I was frustrated by her refusal to respect my feelings, so I tried a different approach. I asked her how she would feel if someone posted an embarrassing photo of her without asking first. She said that was different because she was an adult and could handle it, but that this was just a cute kid photo that no one would think twice about. But people were thinking about it. Several of my own friends had seen the post because I'd been tagged, and a few of them had commented or liked it. My coworker had even mentioned it to me the next day, asking if that was really me in the photo. I had to relive the embarrassment all over again while explaining the situation to people in my current life. When I told Ivy that the post was affecting my current relationships and causing me stress, she accused me of being dramatic. She said I was making a big deal out of nothing and that normal people wouldn't care about an old childhood photo. I pointed out that whether or not she thought it was a big deal, it was clearly important to me, and as someone who cared about me, she should want to respect my feelings about it. But she just kept insisting that I was overreacting and that she had every right to post family photos. The worst part was that other family members started getting involved. A few relatives commented on the post, sharing their own memories from that pool party and adding to the conversation. My mum even commented saying something about how I'd been such a sensitive kid, but that it was sweet how the whole family had comforted me. I felt like I was being ganged up on. Here was this embarrassing moment from my childhood being discussed and analysed by multiple family members in a public forum, and I had no control over it. Every new comment felt like another violation of my privacy. After 3 days of the post being up and gaining more attention, I finally commented directly on it. I politely asked Ivy to please remove the photo because it made me uncomfortable, and I explained that I'd rather not have childhood accidents shared publicly. Some of her friends responded to my comment with messages about how I should lighten up and learn to laugh at myself. One person said I was being ungrateful because Ivy was just trying to share happy family memories. Another said that kids today are too sensitive about everything. Ivy eventually deleted my comment instead of responding to it or removing the post. When I called her about this, she said she didn't want negativity on her social media and that my comment had been bringing down the mood of the post. I ended up having to report the post to Facebook to get it removed, which created even more family drama. Ivy was angry that I'd gone behind her back instead of just talking to her, even though I'd tried to talk to her multiple times and she'd refused to listen. The photo was eventually taken down, but the damage was already done. Screenshots exist forever, and several people had already seen and commented on it. Plus, the whole situation had created tension between me and multiple family members who thought I'd overreacted. That story is over. Using someone's childhood humiliation as social media content without their permission isn't cute or nostalgic, it's cruel. The fact that multiple family members piled on to defend posting an embarrassing photo shows how little they consider your feelings as an actual person rather than just a source of entertainment. Our next story comes from someone who realized that their relationship had a very visible power dynamic problem. My partner walks ahead of me everywhere we go. I've been with my partner Theo for about 6 months, and there's this thing he does that's been bothering me more and more. Whenever we're walking anywhere together, he walks ahead of me. Not just a little bit ahead, but far enough that we can't have conversations and it looks like we're not even together. At first I thought maybe he was just a naturally fast walker and didn't realize he was leaving me behind. I'm not particularly slow, but I'm also not someone who power walks everywhere I go. I prefer a comfortable pace where I can actually enjoy my surroundings and talk to the person I'm with. But when I mentioned it to him, asking if he could slow down a bit so we could walk together, his response surprised me. He said I was just too slow and that he didn't want to dawdle when we had places to be. He said he'd rather get where we're going efficiently than waste time strolling along. The thing is, we're usually not in any kind of hurry. When we're walking to dinner or just exploring downtown on a weekend, there's no time pressure. But Theo walks like he's late for an important meeting, leaving me trailing behind him looking like I'm following a stranger. I started paying attention to how other couples walk together, and I realized that most people naturally adjust their pace to stay with their partner. They might walk faster or slower than they would alone, but they make the effort to stay together because the point is to share the experience. When I brought this up to Theo, he said I was being ridiculous and overthinking things. He said walking speed wasn't important and that I was making a big deal out of nothing, but it didn't feel like nothing to me. It felt like he couldn't be bothered to include me in something as basic as getting from point A to point B. The problem got worse when we started hanging out with his friends. When we'd go out as a group, Theo would walk with his friends, while I ended up walking alone behind everyone else. It looked like I was some random person who happened to be following their group, rather than someone who belonged with them. His friends started to notice it too. One of them actually turned around during a night out and asked where I'd gone, not realizing I was 10 feet behind them trying to keep up. Another friend mentioned that they'd thought Theo had come alone to a street festival because they couldn't see me anywhere near him. The most embarrassing incident happened when we were meeting my parents for dinner. They were waiting outside the restaurant and saw Theo approaching, but they didn't see me because I was half a block behind him. When I finally caught up, my mum quietly asked if everything was okay between us because it had looked like we'd arrived separately. I tried explaining to Theo how this made me feel, that it seemed like he was embarrassed to be seen with me, or like he didn't want people to know we were together. He got defensive and said I was being insecure and reading too much into his walking speed. But it wasn't just about the speed. When I really thought about it, the walking thing was part of a bigger pattern. Theo made decisions about where we were going without asking my input. He'd order for both of us at restaurants without checking what I wanted. He'd make plans for us without discussing them with me first. The walking ahead thing was just the most visible symbol of how he approached our relationship. He was the leader, and I was supposed to follow. He set the pace, literally and figuratively, and it was my job to keep up or get left behind. When I tried to talk to him about this bigger pattern, he said I was being too analytical and that I should just relax and enjoy being taken care of. He said most women would appreciate having a partner who took charge and made decisions instead of constantly needing to discuss everything. But I didn't feel taken care of. I felt dismissed and ignored. Being in a relationship with Theo felt like being a supporting character in his life, rather than being his equal partner. The walking ahead thing was just the most obvious example of how little he considered my experience or feelings. I started testing this theory by deliberately walking more slowly when we were out together. Instead of hurrying to catch up with him, I'd maintain my comfortable pace and see what happened. Sometimes he wouldn't even notice I was no longer beside him until we'd been walking for several blocks. When he'd finally realise I wasn't there and turn around to find me, he'd get irritated and ask why I was being so slow. When I'd explained that I was walking at a normal pace and he was the one who'd sped ahead, he'd act like I was intentionally trying to make things difficult. The final straw came when we were walking to a movie theatre and Theo got so far ahead of me that he actually went inside and bought his ticket before realising I wasn't with him. I was still half a block away, walking at what I considered a reasonable pace for someone who wasn't in a hurry. When I got to the theatre, he was standing there with one ticket looking annoyed. He said he'd assumed I was right behind him and that I should have kept up if I wanted to go in together. The movie was about to start, so I had to quickly buy my own ticket, and we ended up sitting in separate sections because the good seats were already taken. That's when I realised that this wasn't just about walking speed. This was about fundamental respect and consideration. Someone who cares about you doesn't consistently leave you behind, literally or figuratively. That story's over. When someone consistently walks ahead of you like you're not worth waiting for, they're showing you exactly how much they value your presence in their life. Physical positioning often reflects emotional positioning, and being left behind in both is exhausting. Our next story involves someone who learned that some friends think every invitation comes with an automatic +1. My friend brings their new partner to everything. My friend Selena started dating someone new about 2 months ago, and ever since then, their new partner has become a permanent fixture at every single social event, even ones that were specifically planned to be small and intimate. It started with group activities where bringing a partner would make sense. We were all going out to a bar or having a big house party, situations where having extra people around actually adds to the fun. I was happy that Selene had found someone they were excited about, and I liked getting to know their new partner. But then Selena started bringing them to everything, including events that were clearly meant to be just our core friend group. Last month, 3 of us had planned a quiet dinner at my apartment. I'd specifically said it was going to be a best friends only night because I wanted to catch up with everyone and have the kind of deep conversations you can only have in a small group. When Selena showed up with their partner, I was confused but tried to roll with it. Maybe they'd misunderstood the invitation or thought it would be okay since we'd all hung out before. But having an extra person there completely changed the dynamic of the evening. Instead of the intimate catch-up session I'd planned, we spent the night making small talk and including someone who didn't know the history behind most of our conversations. I pulled Selene aside the next week and gently mentioned that I'd been hoping for just the 4 of us that night. I wasn't trying to make them feel bad, just clarifying for future reference. Selene apologised and said they'd assumed it would be fine since their partner got along well with everyone. But then it happened again. We planned a spa day for just the girls in our friend group, something we'd been doing annually for years. It was our tradition, a chance for us to relax and bond without any outside distractions. When I made the reservation, I specifically mentioned that it would be the 4 of us who always went. Selena asked if their partner could come along. I explained that this was our traditional girls' day and that the spa package I'd booked was specifically for our usual group. Selena seemed disappointed but said they understood. The day before the spa trip, Selena texted our group chat saying their partner was feeling left out and asking if we could add them to the reservation. They said it would mean a lot to them if their partner could be included in more of our activities. I felt put in an impossible position. If I said no, I'd look like the mean friend who was excluding someone for no good reason. If I said yes, I'd be changing plans that everyone else had been looking forward to and potentially ruining our traditional bonding time. The other friends in our group were also uncomfortable with the last-minute change, but no one wanted to be the person who said no directly. We ended up letting Selene bring their partner, but the whole day felt different. Our usual openness and intimacy was replaced by polite conversation and surface-level interactions. After that, I started being more direct about when events were meant to be just our original friend group. But Selena seemed to take this personally, like I was being hostile toward their relationship. They started declining invitations to things their partner wasn't invited to, which meant we were seeing less and less of Selena. The breaking point came when I was planning my birthday dinner. I wanted to have a small celebration with just my closest friends, the people who had been in my life for years and knew me best. I specifically told everyone it was going to be an intimate gathering and that I wasn't doing plus ones. Selena immediately asked if their partner could come, saying they didn't want to celebrate my birthday without them. When I reminded them that I'd said no plus ones, they got upset and said I was being unfair and excluding their partner from important moments. I tried to explain that it wasn't personal against their partner, but that I wanted this specific celebration to be just my longtime friends. Celine said that if their partner wasn't welcome, then they wouldn't be coming either. They said a real friend would want to include the people who were important to them. I was hurt that Selene would skip my birthday over this, but I also felt like I shouldn't have to change my vision for my own celebration just to accommodate someone else's relationship needs. Other friends in our group were dealing with the same issue. Selena had started declining any invitation that didn't include their partner. The most frustrating part was that Selene's partner seemed uncomfortable with being brought to everything too. During group activities, I could tell they sometimes felt like an outsider trying to keep up with inside jokes and shared memories they weren't part of. But Selene insisted on including them anyway, like they couldn't bear to be apart for even a few hours. It got to the point where planning anything became complicated. Every invitation had to be evaluated through the lens of whether Selene's partner would be included, and if not, whether Selene would actually show up. Our friend group dynamic had completely shifted to revolve around one person's relationship status. When I finally had a direct conversation with Selene about this pattern, they said I didn't understand what it was like to be in love and want to share everything with your partner. They said that excluding their partner felt like excluding them, and that if I cared about their happiness, I'd make more effort to include the person who was most important to them. I tried to explain that friendship also requires some separate space, that it's healthy to maintain individual relationships outside of romantic partnerships. But Selena seemed to view any request for one-on-one or small group time as an attack on their relationship. The friendship essentially ended when Selene accused me of being jealous of their happiness and trying to sabotage their relationship by creating situations where their partner wasn't welcome. They said real friends would be excited to include new people, and that my resistance showed I wasn't genuinely happy for them. I lost a close friend because I wanted to maintain some boundaries around group dynamics and intimate gatherings. That story's over. There's a difference between including your partner in group activities and making them a mandatory addition to every single social interaction. When someone can't spend a few hours away from their romantic partner, it usually says more about their insecurity than their love. Our next story comes from someone who discovered that living with others sometimes means dealing with their complete disregard for basic courtesy. My roommate plays loud music at 3 a.m. on weeknights. I've been living with my roommate Juliet for about 4 months now, and for the most part, we get along well. We found each other through a roommate matching app, and when we first met, we discussed all the usual things like cleaning schedules, guest policies, and noise levels. During that initial conversation, Juliet mentioned that she was a night owl and liked to stay up late, but she assured me that she'd be respectful about noise, since she knew I had to get up early for work. I told her that was fine, as long as she kept it down after 11 p.m. on weeknights, which she agreed to. For the first month, everything was great. Juliet would stay up late in her room with headphones on, and I never heard a sound from her. I actually thought we'd lucked into the perfect roommate situation, where our different schedules wouldn't interfere with each other. But then something changed. About 3 months ago, Juliet started playing music late at night without headphones. Not just soft background music, but loud, bass-heavy songs that I could hear clearly through the walls. The first time it happened, I figured it was a one-time thing. Maybe she'd forgotten I was sleeping. When I mentioned it to her the next morning, she apologized and said she'd been cleaning her room and had lost track of time. She promised it wouldn't happen again. But 2 nights later, the same thing happened. Music started blaring from her room around midnight, and it continued until almost 2 a.m. I knocked on her door and politely asked her to turn it down because I had to work the next day. She seemed annoyed by the request, but did lower the volume slightly. However, it was still loud enough that I couldn't fall asleep, and I ended up lying awake until she finally turned it off. The next morning, I tried to have a more serious conversation about the noise issue. Juliet said she understood my concern, but explained that she had trouble sleeping and that music helped her relax. She said headphones hurt her ears if she wore them for too long, so she preferred to play music through her speakers. I suggested she could try different types of headphones, or maybe find other ways to relax that wouldn't keep me awake. But Juliet said she'd already tried everything, and that playing music was the only thing that worked for her sleep routine. The problem continued, and actually got worse. Instead of stopping the music by 2 a.m, Juliet started playing it until 3 or even 4 in the morning. When I'd text her asking her to turn it down, she'd either ignore the message or respond with something like, "Sorry, almost done," but then continue playing music for another hour. I was getting maybe 4 or 5 hours of sleep on weeknights, and it was seriously affecting my work performance. I was exhausted, irritable, and having trouble concentrating during important meetings. My boss even asked if everything was okay because my usual productivity had dropped significantly. When I explained to Juliet how the sleep deprivation was affecting my job, she said she was sorry, but that she had sleep issues too, and needed to do what worked for her. She suggested I try wearing earplugs or using a white noise machine to block out the sound. I did try both of those things, but her music was loud enough that even with earplugs and white noise, I could still hear the bass lines thumping through the walls. It wasn't just the volume, it was the fact that music has rhythm and variation that makes it impossible to tune out completely. The situation came to a head last week when Juliet played music until 4:30 a.m. on a Wednesday night. I had a major presentation at work the next day, something I'd been preparing for weeks, and I got less than 3 hours of sleep because of her inconsiderate behaviour. I was so exhausted during my presentation that I actually forgot part of my prepared remarks and had to improvise. It didn't go well, and my supervisor mentioned afterwards that I'd seemed unusually scattered and unprepared. That evening, I confronted Juliet directly about how her nighttime music was affecting my career. I told her about the presentation disaster and explained that I couldn't continue living with someone who had no regard for my need to sleep before workdays. Juliet got defensive and said I was being unfair and trying to control her lifestyle. She said she paid rent just like I did and had every right to use her room however she wanted. She claimed that asking her to change her sleep routine was unreasonable and that I should find ways to adapt instead of expecting her to change. I pointed out that we'd specifically discussed noise boundaries when we moved in together and that she'd agreed to keep it down on weeknights. But she said that was before she realised how much the music helped her sleep and that her mental health was more important than my convenience. When I suggested she could compromise by using headphones for just a few hours or finding a different apartment if she needed to play loud music all night, she accused me of trying to force her to move out. She said I was being selfish and inconsiderate of her needs. The irony of being called selfish by someone who was keeping me awake until 4 a.m. on work nights was not lost on me. I realised that Juliet genuinely believed her sleep problems gave her the right to disrupt everyone else's sleep, and that any request for basic courtesy was an unreasonable demand. I've started looking for a new place to live because it's clear that this situation isn't going to improve. That story is over. Claiming that headphones hurt your ears while blasting music until 4 a.m. on weeknights shows a breathtaking level of selfishness disguised as a medical need. When someone prioritizes their sleep routine over your ability to function at work, they're telling you exactly how little they respect you as a person. Our final story comes from someone who learned that some parents never quite grasp the concept of adult independence. My mum reads my texts over my shoulder. I'm 23 years old, graduated from college last year, and I've been living back at home while I save money for my own place. It's a temporary arrangement that's been mostly fine, except for one major issue. My mum, Owen, has absolutely no sense of boundaries when it comes to my privacy. The problem started almost immediately after I moved back home. I'd be sitting on the couch texting friends or checking social media, and my mum would walk up behind me and start reading over my shoulder. Not just glancing as she walked by, but actually stopping and reading entire conversations. The first time it happened, I was texting with a friend about weekend plans. My mum stood behind me for several minutes, reading our entire exchange about where we might go for dinner and what movie we were thinking of seeing. When I noticed her there, I asked what she was doing. She acted like it was completely normal. "I was just curious who you were texting," she said. "It's not like you were talking about anything private." She seemed genuinely confused about why I would have a problem with her reading my personal conversations. I explained that even if the conversation wasn't particularly sensitive, I still deserve privacy when communicating with my friends. I told her that reading over my shoulder made me uncomfortable and asked her to please stop doing it. My mum's response was that she was just being interested in my life and that parents should know what their children are up to. She said that when I was living under her roof, she had a right to know who I was talking to and what I was discussing. I pointed out that I'm an adult, not a teenager, and that her right to know didn't extend to reading my private messages. But she said that age didn't matter as long as I was living in her house, and that if I wanted complete privacy, I should get my own place. The behaviour continued and actually got worse. My mum started timing her movements around the house so she could walk behind me whenever I was using my phone. She'd find excuses to come into whatever room I was in, always positioning herself where she could see my screen. When I started holding my phone at angles where she couldn't read it, she'd actually ask me to turn it so she could see better. If I refused, she'd get hurt and say I was being secretive, and that she was just trying to stay connected to my life. The most uncomfortable incident happened when I was texting with someone I'd started dating. It wasn't anything explicit, just normal getting to know you conversation, but it was personal and meant to be private. My mum read the entire exchange over my shoulder, including messages about our first date plans. Later that evening, she brought up details from those texts during dinner conversation. She asked me direct questions about the person I was seeing, referencing specific things they'd mentioned in our private messages. It was mortifying to realise she'd been storing up information from my personal conversations to use later. When I confronted her about this, she said she was just being a concerned parent and that she wanted to know about the people I was spending time with. She said it was natural for mothers to be curious about their children's romantic lives and that I was being oversensitive about privacy. I tried to explain that there's a difference between me choosing to share information about my dating life and her secretly reading my private messages to obtain that information. But she couldn't seem to understand the distinction. The situation escalated when my mum started commenting on group chats she'd read over my shoulder. She'd make references to inside jokes or ongoing conversations that she should have had no knowledge of. My friends started noticing that I seemed to know things I shouldn't know, not realising that my mum had been feeding me information from their private discussions. I had to start going to my room every time I wanted to use my phone, but even then, my mum would find reasons to come in and check on me. She'd bring me snacks I didn't ask for, or come in to ask questions about random household things, always managing to glance at my phone screen while she was there. When I started keeping my phone face down or putting it away whenever she entered the room, she accused me of hiding something from her. She said that people who weren't doing anything wrong shouldn't need to be so secretive about their communications. The final straw came when my mum read a conversation I was having with a friend who was going through a difficult personal situation. My friend had confided in me about family problems and specifically asked me not to share the information with anyone else. My mum not only read those private messages, but then brought up my friend's situation during a conversation with her own friends, treating it like regular gossip. When my friend found out that their personal business had been shared, they were understandably upset and felt betrayed. I had to explain to my friend that I hadn't intentionally shared their private information, but that my mum had been reading my texts without permission. It was humiliating to admit that I had no control over who had access to my personal conversations. I told my mum that her invasion of privacy had damaged one of my friendships and asked her to please stop reading my messages. But she said it wasn't her fault that my friend was upset, and that if people were going to share sensitive information through text, they should expect that others might see it. She seemed completely unable to understand that reading someone else's private communications without permission was wrong, regardless of the consequences. To her, the fact that I was living in her house gave her unlimited access to every aspect of my personal life. I've started only texting people when I'm completely alone, and I've had to warn my friends that my conversations might not be private. It's embarrassing to have to explain to adult friends that my mother reads my texts like I'm a teenager who can't be trusted. The whole situation has made me realise that moving back home was a bigger mistake than I initially thought. My mum sees my presence in her house as an invitation to treat me like a child again, and no amount of explanation about adult boundaries seems to get through to her. I'm looking at apartments now because I'd rather stretch my budget than continue living somewhere my basic privacy isn't respected. That story is over. When someone justifies reading your private messages by saying people who aren't doing anything wrong shouldn't be secretive, they're essentially saying you have no right to privacy unless you're hiding something illegal. Living with parents as an adult requires mutual respect, not surveillance disguised as concern. Our next story comes from someone who learned that some partners think consultation is optional when it comes to shared meals. My partner ordered food without asking what I wanted. Last weekend, my partner Jonas and I decided to order takeout instead of cooking dinner. We'd had a long day running errands, and neither of us felt like dealing with meal prep and cleanup. I was looking forward to relaxing with some good food and maybe watching a movie together. I was in the bathroom when Jonas called the restaurant to place our order. When I came out, he was already off the phone and said the food would be delivered in about 30 minutes. I asked what he'd ordered for me, and he said he'd gotten me the same thing he was having, some kind of spicy chicken dish. The problem was that I don't really like spicy food. Jonas knows this about me because it's come up multiple times in our relationship. I've mentioned that I prefer mild flavours and that spicy food tends to upset my stomach. It's not like it's some secret preference he couldn't have known about. When I reminded him that I don't eat spicy food, he seemed annoyed that I was bringing it up. He said he'd already placed the order and it was too late to change it. He told me I could just eat around the spicy parts, or that maybe I'd like it if I tried it with an open mind. I explained that it wasn't about being open-minded, but that spicy food actually makes me physically uncomfortable. I asked if he could call back and add something mild to the order, even just a side dish that I could eat as my main meal. Jonas said he didn't want to complicate the order and that I was being too picky. He said most people would just eat what was ordered instead of making a big deal about it. He acted like I was being unreasonable for having food preferences that didn't match his. When the food arrived, I tried to eat the chicken dish he'd ordered, but it was way too spicy for me. Even after scraping off most of the sauce, my mouth was burning and my eyes were watering. I managed to eat maybe 3 bites before giving up. Jonas was irritated that I wasn't eating the food and said I wasn't even trying to enjoy it. He said he'd wasted money ordering food that I was just going to refuse to eat. But I hadn't refused anything. I genuinely tried to eat something that was physically uncomfortable for me. I ended up making myself a sandwich while Jonas ate both portions of the spicy chicken. The whole evening felt tense because he was annoyed about the wasted food, and I was frustrated that he'd completely disregarded my dietary preferences when placing the order. The next day, I tried to talk to him about what had happened. I explained that in the future, I'd prefer if we discussed food orders together so we could both get something we'd enjoy. I wasn't trying to be controlling, just asking to be included in decisions that affected both of us. Jonas said I was making too big a deal about one dinner and that I should learn to be more flexible about food. He said that constantly accommodating everyone's preferences made ordering food unnecessarily complicated, and that sometimes people just have to eat what's available. But this wasn't about being flexible in an emergency situation. This was about him making a choice for both of us, without any input from me, despite knowing that his choice wouldn't work for me. It felt like he'd prioritized his own convenience over my basic comfort. I suggested that we could take turns choosing restaurants, or that we could order from places that had options for both of us. But Jonas said that was overthinking things, and that normal couples don't need such complicated systems for ordering food. The most frustrating part was that he seemed to think my food preferences were optional, like something I could choose to ignore if I just tried hard enough. He couldn't understand that some people have genuine physical reactions to certain foods that aren't just about being picky or difficult. When I pointed out that he would never eat something he genuinely disliked just to avoid inconveniencing me, he said that was different because his dislikes were more legitimate than mine. Apparently, not liking seafood, his thing, was more valid than not being able to handle spicy food, my thing. The whole situation made me realize that Jonas approaches our relationship with the assumption that his preferences should be the default for both of us. When there's a choice to be made, he makes it based on what he wants, and then expects me to adapt to his decision. It's not really about the food. It's about the fact that he doesn't automatically consider my needs when making choices that affect both of us. Whether it's where to eat, what to watch, or how to spend our weekends, Jonas tends to decide first and inform me second. That story is over. When someone knows you can't eat spicy food but orders it for you anyway, they're basically saying your comfort matters less than their convenience. The idea that some food preferences are more legitimate than others is just a way to dismiss your needs while protecting their own. Our next story involves someone who discovered that their friend had a very specific sense of humour that only worked in one direction. My friend always makes fun of my laugh. I have what I've always known as a distinctive laugh. It's loud, it's a bit snorty, and when something really funny happens, I completely lose control of it. I've never been self-conscious about it because laughing's supposed to be joyful, and I'd rather have an ugly laugh than not find things funny at all. My friend Mira has always seemed to find my laugh entertaining, but not in the way I initially thought. What I assumed was her enjoying my enthusiasm for humour was actually her finding my laugh itself hilarious, in a way that made me the joke rather than part of it. It started with little comments here and there. When we'd be watching something funny and I'd laugh, Mira would sometimes imitate the sound I'd just made. At first I thought she was just being playful, like how friends sometimes mimic each other's expressions or mannerisms in an affectionate way. But then she started doing it in front of other people. We'd be in a group setting, something funny would happen, I'd laugh naturally, and Mira would immediately copy my laugh in an exaggerated way that made everyone else start giggling, not at whatever had been funny originally, but at the sound I'd just made. The first time this happened, I was confused about why everyone was suddenly looking at me and snickering. It took me a moment to realize that Mira's imitation of my laugh had become the new source of entertainment, and that I'd unknowingly provided the material for everyone else's amusement. When I asked Mira privately about it later, she said she was just being silly, and that she thought I knew she was joking around. She said my laugh was unique, and that she found it endearing, which made me feel like maybe I was overreacting to what was just friendly teasing, but the behaviour continued and got more elaborate. Instead of just imitating my laugh after I'd doing impressions of it randomly I'd already laughed, Mira started during conversations. She'd be telling a story about something completely unrelated, and then she'd suddenly make the snorting sound and say something like, "You know, that laugh that sounds just like this." Other people in our friend group started joining in. They'd make the sound when I wasn't even around, apparently, because people began asking me about the laugh thing in contexts where I hadn't laughed at all. Mira had turned my natural reaction to humour into a running joke that followed me even when I wasn't participating in it. The worst incident happened at a birthday party where I didn't know most of the people. Something genuinely funny happened, and I laughed without thinking about it. Mira immediately did her exaggerated version of my laugh, and several strangers started laughing at her imitation. One person actually said, "Oh my God, does she always laugh like that?" And Mira responded with, "Every single time, isn't it hilarious?" She then did the imitation again for the benefit of people who'd missed it the first time. I felt humiliated. Here were people I'd just met, and their first impression of me was being formed around Mira's mockery of something I couldn't control. I wasn't being seen as funny or fun to be around. I was being seen as the person with the weird laugh that everyone could entertain themselves by making fun of. When I confronted Mira about this later, she said I was being too sensitive and that she was just having fun. She said everyone knew she was joking and that no one was actually making fun of me in a mean way. She claimed that if I couldn't laugh at myself, I was missing the point of humour entirely. That story is over. Making someone's laugh into a public spectacle shows exactly how cruel people can be while hiding behind, "It's just a joke." True friends don't turn your natural reactions into entertainment for strangers. These stories remind us that the people we trust most sometimes have the power to hurt us deepest. Whether it's friends who lie about being tired to avoid us, family members who steal our money, or partners who dismiss our basic needs, the common thread is a fundamental lack of respect for boundaries and feelings. The internet gives us this window into just how casually some people will cross lines that should never need to be drawn in the first place. Sweet dreams, and remember to check those red flags in your own relationships. Our next story comes from someone dealing with a friend who has some serious boundary issues. My friend always shows up to my place unannounced, and I'm losing my mind. I'm 24, and I live in a small apartment downtown. It's nothing fancy, but it's my space, and I work really hard to keep it clean and organised. I'm also someone who values my alone time, especially after long days at work. My friend Clara has this habit of just showing up whenever she feels like it. Not texting first, not calling, just appearing at my door like it's the most natural thing in the world. At first, I thought it was kind of sweet. We've been friends since college, and I figured she just felt comfortable enough with me to drop by spontaneously. But it's gotten completely out of hand. Last Tuesday, I was in my pyjamas at 8 p.m, halfway through a face mask, when I heard knocking. I looked through the peephole, and there's Clara, holding a bag of takeout and grinning. I opened the door because what else was I supposed to do? And she walks in like she owns the place. She starts unpacking Chinese food on my coffee table and says I was in the neighbourhood and thought we could hang out. The thing is, she doesn't live in my neighbourhood. She lives across town. So she specifically drove 20 minutes to show up unannounced at my apartment. This has been happening at least twice a week for the past 3 months. Sometimes she brings food, sometimes she doesn't. Sometimes she stays for an hour, sometimes she's there until midnight. I never know when it's going to happen, so I can't plan anything for my evenings. Last week was the worst. I had a guy over for the first time in months. We were watching a movie on the couch. Things were going really well, and then bang, bang, bang on the door. I tried to ignore it, but Clara started calling my name through the door. She knows I'm home because my car was parked outside. I had to excuse myself, go to the door, and explain that I had company. Clara looked past me at the guy on my couch and said, "Oh, I can wait until he leaves." Like she was planning to just sit there and wait for my date to end so we could hang out. I told her it wasn't a good time, and she got this hurt expression on her face. She said, "Since when do you not have time for your friends?" I felt terrible, but I also felt invaded. This was supposed to be a private evening, and she just expected to be included or to take priority. The guy ended up leaving about 20 minutes later. He said he could tell I was stressed about the situation and didn't want to make it weird. I haven't heard from him since, which honestly, I can't blame him for. I've tried dropping hints about calling first. I've mentioned that I like to plan my evenings, that I'm not always in the mood for company, that sometimes I have other plans. Nothing seems to sink in. Clara just says things like, "But we're such good friends, you don't mind me stopping by." 2 nights ago, she showed up at 9:30 p.m. while I was on a work call. I'm working remotely now, and sometimes I have calls with clients in different time zones. I couldn't answer the door, but she kept knocking for almost 10 minutes. My neighbours probably think I'm being stalked. When I called her later to explain why I couldn't answer, she said she saw my lights on and my car outside, so she knew I was home. She seemed genuinely confused about why I wouldn't just end my work call to let her in. I love Clara, but I'm starting to dread the sound of knocking at my door. I can't relax in my own apartment because I never know when she's going to show up. I've started parking my car around the corner sometimes, just so she'll think I'm not home. The worst part is that when I try to make plans with her in advance, she's often busy or cancels last minute. But somehow she always has time to drop by unannounced when it's convenient for her. Last weekend, I suggested we meet for brunch on Sunday. She said she couldn't because she had family stuff. Then Sunday night, she showed up at my door with wine, saying she wanted to decompress after dealing with her family all day. I had already made plans to have a quiet night in, but she acted like I should be grateful she chose to spend her evening with me. I don't know how to set boundaries without hurting her feelings. Every time I bring up the unannounced visits, she gets defensive and says she thought we had the kind of friendship where we could just be spontaneous. She makes me feel like I'm being uptight or unfriendly, but I shouldn't have to hide in my own apartment or park around the corner to avoid unexpected visitors. I shouldn't have to worry about someone showing up every time I'm trying to have a peaceful evening or spend time with someone else. The thing is, if Clara would just text me first, most of the time I'd probably say yes to hanging out. It's not that I don't want to see her, it's that I want to have some control over my own schedule and space. I want to be able to say no sometimes without feeling guilty about it. That story ends there. The complete lack of awareness from Clara is just staggering. Showing up during a date and expecting to wait around until it's over crosses every possible boundary. Some people really think friendship means having unlimited access to your time and space. Moving on to our next story, which involves family drama and stolen credit for creative work. My cousin took credit for a painting I made, and now everyone thinks he's this amazing artist. I'm 22, and I've been painting since I was a kid. It's always been my way of dealing with stress and expressing myself. I'm not professionally trained, but I've gotten pretty good over the years through practice and online tutorials. About 6 months ago, I finished this landscape painting that I was really proud of. It took me almost 3 weeks to complete, working on it every evening after work. It was this sunset scene with mountains and a lake, lots of detail in the reflections and the way the light hit the water. Honestly, it was probably the best thing I'd ever painted. My cousin Jonas came over to my apartment while I was putting the finishing touches on it. He stood there watching me work and kept commenting on how impressive it looked. He asked a bunch of questions about my technique, what brushes I used, how long it took. I was happy to share because it's rare that anyone in my family shows interest in my art. Jonas seemed genuinely fascinated by the whole process. He took some photos of me working on the final details and said he wanted to show people how talented his cousin was. I thought it was sweet that he was so supportive. A few weeks later, I went to Jonas's housewarming party. He'd just moved into this new place with his girlfriend, and they were showing everyone around. When we got to the living room, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, hanging prominently above the couch, was my painting. I was confused at first. I figured maybe Jonas had asked to borrow it, and I'd forgotten, even though I definitely would have remembered something like that. But then I heard him talking to a group of people about it. He was standing right next to the painting, gesturing at different parts of it, explaining his creative process. He talked about how he'd been inspired by a camping trip he took last summer, how he'd mixed the colours to get just the right shade for the sunset. He even mentioned the specific brushes he'd used, which were the exact same ones I'd told him about when he was watching me work. I stood there listening to him take credit for weeks of my work, describing techniques I'd taught myself through years of practice. The worst part was how convincing he sounded. He knew all the right details because he'd watched me create it and asked me to explain everything. When someone asked how long it took him, he said about 3 weeks, working on it every evening after work. Those were my exact words from when I'd described the process to him. He'd memorized my entire explanation and was repeating it as his own experience. I was so shocked I didn't know what to say. Part of me thought maybe there was some misunderstanding, that maybe people had assumed it was his work and he just hadn't corrected them yet. But as I listened longer, it became clear that he was actively claiming credit for creating it. Several people at the party complimented Jonas on his artistic talent. One woman said she was impressed that he was so creative in addition to his day job in accounting. Jonas just smiled and said he found painting relaxing, that it was his way of unwinding after stressful days. I finally pulled him aside and asked him what was going on. He looked uncomfortable for a moment, then said he'd bought the painting from me and thought that meant he could tell people whatever he wanted about it. But that wasn't true. He'd never bought it from me. He'd never even asked to borrow it. When I pointed this out, Jonas got defensive. He said I'd left it at his place after the last family dinner, which also wasn't true. He claimed I'd told him he could have it, which definitely never happened. Then he said it wasn't that big a deal because I wasn't a professional artist anyway. So what did it matter who people thought painted it? That comment really stung. Just because I don't sell my art professionally doesn't mean it doesn't matter to me. I put weeks of work into that painting, and it represented hours of learning and practicing techniques I'd been developing for years. I asked him to tell people the truth, that I was the one who painted it. Jonas said that would be embarrassing because he'd already told everyone it was his work. He suggested we could say we painted it together, like it was a collaborative project, but that felt almost worse than him taking full credit, because it would still be a lie. The conversation ended with Jonas saying he'd think about it, but nothing changed. Every time I've been to his place since then, the painting is still hanging there. He still tells people he painted it. He's even started talking about working on new pieces, though I haven't seen any evidence of him actually painting anything. The worst part is that other family members have started asking me why I don't paint anymore, since Jonas is so talented at it. They assume that art runs in the family, but that he got all the creative genes. Some of them have even suggested I should ask Jonas to teach me how to paint. I've thought about calling him out publicly, but that would create family drama and make me look petty. I've considered taking photos of my other paintings to prove that I'm the real artist. But Jonas could always claim he painted those too, or that we've been collaborating all along. What makes it worse is that Jonas has started getting requests from friends who want him to paint something for them. He keeps making excuses about being too busy or not having the right inspiration, but people are offering him money for commissioned work based on my painting. I feel like I can't even work on new paintings anymore, because I'm worried Jonas will somehow take credit for those too. It's stolen my motivation and made me second guess sharing my art with anyone in my family. That story is over. The calculated nature of how Jonas stole credit is what makes this so infuriating. He didn't just take the painting, he memorized every detail about the creative process to make his lie more convincing. That's not a moment of weakness, that's deliberate theft of someone's creative identity. Our next story deals with a partner who has some interesting priorities when it comes to romantic holidays. My partner forgot Valentine's Day and then got mad at me for being upset. I'm 26 and I've been with Lena for about 2 years now. We live together and generally have a good relationship, but she has this thing about holidays that drives me absolutely crazy. Every year when Valentine's Day approaches, Lena starts this whole routine about how it's just a commercial holiday designed to make people spend money. She'll go on these rants about how if you really love someone, you shouldn't need a special day to show it. She says the whole thing is manufactured by greeting card companies and restaurants to guilt people into buying overpriced flowers and jewellery. I get her point to some extent. Valentine's Day can be commercialised and expensive. But here's the thing, I actually like having designated times to celebrate our relationship. I like the excuse to be extra romantic, to plan something special, to make an effort beyond our usual routine. It doesn't have to be expensive or elaborate, but I think it's nice to acknowledge the day somehow. Last year, I suggested we could just cook dinner together at home and exchange small gifts. Nothing fancy, just a way to mark the occasion. Lena agreed, but when February 14th came around, she acted like it was any other day. No dinner, no gifts, no acknowledgement that it was Valentine's Day at all. When I brought it up that evening, she said she thought we'd decided not to do anything because the whole holiday was stupid. That wasn't what we'd agreed on, but I didn't want to fight about it, so I let it go. This year, I decided to be more direct about what I wanted. In January, I told Lena that Valentine's Day was important to me, even if she thought it was silly. I explained that it wasn't about the money or the commercialism. It was about taking time to celebrate us. She seemed to understand and said we could plan something simple. February 14th rolls around, and once again, Lena acts like it's a completely normal Tuesday. She gets up, goes to work, comes home, and starts her usual evening routine. No mention of Valentine's Day, no acknowledgement that we'd talked about doing something special. I waited until after dinner to say anything. I asked if she remembered what day it was. She looked at me blankly for a second, then said, "Oh right, Valentine's Day." Like she'd just remembered it was also National Pizza Day, or something equally insignificant. I told her I was disappointed that we hadn't done anything to celebrate, especially since we'd discussed it weeks earlier. That's when Lena got defensive. She said she'd been busy at work and hadn't had time to plan anything. She reminded me that I knew how she felt about manufactured holidays and suggested that I was being materialistic for caring about it. I tried to explain that it wasn't about gifts or money. It was about the fact that something was important to me, and she'd completely ignored it. I said it felt like she didn't care enough to make even the smallest effort, like picking up a card or suggesting we watch a romantic movie together. Lena's response was to get angry at me for being upset. She said I was being ridiculous and emotional over nothing. She told me that if I wanted to celebrate Valentine's Day so badly, I should have planned something myself instead of expecting her to do it. She said I was trying to force her to participate in something she fundamentally disagreed with. But here's what really got to me. The next day, Lena's social media was full of posts about Galentine's Day. She'd gone out with her female friends for drinks and posted all these photos of them celebrating their friendship. She bought cards for her friends, brought them little gifts, made a whole production out of appreciating the women in her life. When I pointed out the contradiction, she said that was different, because Galentine's Day was about genuine friendship, not commercial romance. She couldn't see how hypocritical it was to reject Valentine's Day as manufactured while enthusiastically participating in another February celebration. The fight escalated from there. Lena accused me of being controlling and trying to force her to conform to societal expectations. I told her that she was being selfish and dismissive of my feelings. We didn't speak for 2 days after that. When we finally made up, Lena said she was sorry for forgetting, but she also said she hoped I would stop making such a big deal about holidays in the future. She suggested that maybe we weren't compatible if I needed these kinds of celebrations to feel loved. That comment really hurt because it made me question whether I was being unreasonable. But I don't think wanting your partner to acknowledge something that's important to you is asking too much. I'm not demanding expensive jewellery or fancy dinners. I just want to feel like she cares enough to make some small effort. The worst part is that Lena is thoughtful in other ways. She remembers when I have important meetings at work. She brings me coffee when I'm having a bad day. She listens when I need to vent about family drama. But when it comes to traditional, romantic gestures, she shuts down completely. I've started wondering if this is about more than just Valentine's Day. Maybe Lena has some deeper issue with romantic commitment or traditional relationship milestones. Or maybe she really does just hate commercialized holidays, and I need to accept that about her. But it's hard to accept when her rejection of the holiday feels like a rejection of my feelings. Every year, I hope she'll change her mind, or at least compromise, and every year I end up disappointed and feeling like I'm asking for too much. That story wraps up there. The selective application of holiday principles is what really stands out here. Lena can celebrate Galentine's Day with full enthusiasm while treating Valentine's Day like a personal attack on her values. Some people use their principles as weapons when it's convenient, but abandon them when they want to have fun. Now let's dive into a story about privacy violations that hit way too close to home. My sister reads my diary and then jokes about it in front of people. I'm 19 and still live at home while I'm going to community college. My family has always been pretty close, maybe too close sometimes, but I've always valued having some private space to process my thoughts and feelings. I've kept a journal since I was about 14. It's nothing fancy, just a regular notebook where I write about my day, my relationships, things I'm worried about, goals I'm working toward. It helps me sort through my emotions and figure out what I'm actually thinking about situations in my life. I keep the journal in my bedroom, usually on my nightstand or in my desk drawer. I've never made a big deal about it being private because I figured it was obvious that personal journals aren't meant to be read by other people. It's like basic respect for boundaries. My sister Hugo is 17 and has apparently been reading my journal for months without me knowing. I only found out because she started making comments that seemed oddly specific to things I'd written about. A few weeks ago, I was telling my family about this guy I'd been talking to from one of my classes. Hugo immediately jumped in with, "Oh, is this the one you think has really nice hands?" I was confused because I'd never mentioned anything about his hands to my family. That was something I'd written in my journal after we'd studied together, and I'd noticed how he moved his hands when he talked. Then last week, I was complaining about being tired because I'd stayed up late finishing an assignment. Hugo said, "Maybe you wouldn't be so tired if you didn't spend so much time overthinking every text message you get." Again, that was weirdly specific to something I'd written about. How I tend to read too much into people's messages. I started getting suspicious, but I didn't want to accuse her of anything without being sure, so I decided to test it. I wrote a fake entry in my journal about considering getting my nose pierced, something I have absolutely no interest in doing. 2 days later, Hugo casually asked me at dinner if I was thinking about getting any piercings. That's when I knew for sure she'd been reading my private thoughts. I confronted her about it that night, and she didn't even try to deny it. She just shrugged and said she was bored and my journal was more interesting than anything on Netflix. I told her how violated I felt and asked her to stop reading it. Hugo said she would, but then she added that I shouldn't write anything down if I didn't want people to know about it. Like it was my fault for expecting privacy in my own bedroom. But the reading wasn't even the worst part. Hugo started making jokes about things I'd written, especially in front of other people. She'd bring up my crushes, my insecurities, my embarrassing moments, all disguised as casual comments or sisterly teasing. At a family barbecue, Hugo mentioned in front of my cousins that I was going through a phase where I analyse every social interaction. She was referencing something I'd written about feeling socially awkward after a party where I felt like I'd said all the wrong things. It was a vulnerable moment I'd worked through in my journal, and she turned it into a punchline. Another time, she told our mum that I was obsessed with becoming more confident, which came directly from journal entries where I'd been working through some self-esteem issues. She made it sound silly and superficial, but those were actually some of my most honest reflections about personal growth. The worst incident happened when my friend came over for dinner. Hugo started telling this story about how I'd been practicing conversations in the mirror. That was something I'd written about doing to prepare for a job interview, but she made it sound like I was some weirdo talking to myself for no reason. My friend laughed, but I could tell she thought it was weird. Hugo acted like she was just sharing a funny family story, but she knew exactly what she was doing. She was taking my private thoughts and using them to embarrass me in front of people. When I told her later how humiliated I felt. Hugo said I was being too sensitive. She claimed she was just teasing and that all siblings do that kind of thing. She said, if I couldn't handle people knowing about my thoughts, maybe I shouldn't write them down. But that's not how privacy works. Just because I write something in a private journal doesn't mean I've given up my right to keep those thoughts to myself. Hugo is essentially punishing me for having an inner life and trying to work through my feelings in a healthy way. I've tried hiding my journal in different places, but Hugo always seems to find it. I've considered getting a lockbox, but that feels ridiculous. I shouldn't have to lock up my personal belongings to keep my sister from violating my privacy. The whole situation has made me stop journaling regularly, which is frustrating because writing was really helping me process things. Now I'm constantly worried about whether Hugo will find whatever I write and use it against me later. I've talked to my parents about it, but they just say it's normal sibling behaviour and that we need to work it out ourselves. They don't seem to understand that this isn't just typical brother-sister teasing. This is a systematic invasion of my privacy followed by public humiliation. Hugo has turned my journal into her personal entertainment, and she's using my private thoughts as material for jokes at my expense. It's made me feel like I can't trust anyone in my own family with my real feelings or experiences. The betrayal isn't just that she read my journal, it's that she's weaponizing my vulnerability and making me regret being honest with myself about my struggles and growth. That's not sibling rivalry, that's emotional manipulation. That story is complete. The casual cruelty of turning someone's private growth into public embarrassment is genuinely disturbing. Hugo has figured out how to turn her sister's self-reflection into a comedy show for her own amusement. That's not sibling teasing, that's psychological warfare disguised as family dynamics. Let's move into our next situation, which involves a friend who seems to have a very selective memory about friendship responsibilities. My friend only texts me when they need a ride somewhere. I'm 23 and I have a car, which apparently makes me the designated driver for everyone I know. But there's one friend in particular, Rosa, who takes this to an extreme that's starting to really bother me. Rosa and I became friends about 2 years ago when we worked at the same restaurant. We got along great during our shifts, had similar senses of humour, and started hanging out outside of work pretty regularly. When I left that job to start working in an office, we promised to stay in touch. For the first few months after I left, Rosa and I would text pretty regularly. We'd make plans to hang out, share funny stories from our respective jobs, send each other memes, the usual friend stuff. But gradually, I noticed that Rosa was only initiating contact when she needed something from me. The pattern became really obvious over the past year. Rosa will go weeks without responding to my messages or reaching out at all, but the moment she needs a ride somewhere, my phone lights up with multiple texts asking if I'm free. Last month was a perfect example. I texted Rosa asking if she wanted to grab lunch on a Saturday. No response. I sent her a funny video I thought she'd like. Nothing. I asked how her new job was going. Radio silence. Then 3 weeks later, she texts me at 11 p.m. asking if I can pick her up from a bar downtown because she's too drunk to drive. This happens constantly. Rosa needs a ride to the airport. Suddenly I'm her best friend. She needs someone to drive her to pick up her car from the mechanic, and I get a long message about how much she misses hanging out with me. Her car is in the shop, and she needs rides to work for a week. And suddenly she's texting me every day, like we talk all the time. What makes it worse is how she frames these requests. Rosa doesn't just ask for a ride. She acts like we're close friends who do favours for each other all the time. She'll say things like, "Hey girl, I know I can always count on you," or "You're such an amazing friend for always being there for me." But when I actually need something from her, Rosa is nowhere to be found. When I was moving apartments and asked if she could help me pack some boxes, she said she was busy, but never suggested an alternative time. When I was going through a rough patch with my boyfriend and really needed someone to talk to, Rosa read my messages but didn't respond for 3 days. The most frustrating part is that Rosa acts like our friendship is totally normal. When she does need a ride, She'll chat with me in the car like we just talked yesterday. She'll ask about my life, tell me about hers, make jokes, act completely engaged and interested. Then the moment I drop her off, she disappears again until the next time she needs transportation. I've tried addressing this indirectly by mentioning how we don't talk very often anymore. Rosa always agrees and says we should hang out soon, but then makes no effort to actually make plans. She'll say she's been super busy with work or dating or family stuff, but somehow she always has time to text me when she needs a favour. A few weeks ago, I decided to test this theory. Rosa asked me to pick her up from a night out because her designated driver had bailed. Instead of just agreeing like I usually do, I said I was already in bed, but suggested she could take an Uber. Rosa responded with, "Come on, you know I'm broke right now. I'll pay you back for gas like I always do." Except Rosa has never paid me back for gas. Not once in the 2 years I've been giving her rides. She always says she'll Venmo me later, but it never happens. I've probably spent hundreds of dollars on gas driving Rosa around, and she acts like she's doing me a favour by letting me help her. That night, Rosa ended up getting a ride from someone else, and I didn't hear from her again for almost a month. No follow-up about hanging out, no casual check-in messages, nothing. Then last week she texted asking if I could drive her to a job interview because her car was making weird noises. I'm starting to realise that Rosa doesn't actually consider me a friend. I'm just a convenient resource she can access when she needs something. She puts in just enough effort to maintain the connection, but only because she wants to keep me available for future favours. What's really bothering me is how one-sided this has become. I'm always the one making an effort to maintain our friendship. I'm the one reaching out, suggesting plans, trying to stay connected. Rosa only participates when she needs something from me. I've thought about just stopping responding to her ride requests, but then I feel guilty. What if she's actually stranded somewhere? What if she genuinely can't afford an Uber and really needs help? But at the same time, I'm tired of being treated like a taxi service instead of a friend. The relationship has become transactional in the worst way. Rosa gets free rides and emergency transportation, and in return, I get the illusion of friendship and a bunch of empty promises about hanging out that never materialise. That story ends there. Rosa has perfected the art of friendship maintenance, doing just enough to keep the connection alive so she can exploit it when needed. The fake intimacy she performs during car rides is particularly manipulative because it creates the illusion that the relationship is mutual when it's completely one-sided. Our next story takes us to family dinner dynamics that will sound familiar to anyone who's ever tried to finish a sentence around certain relatives. My brother always interrupts me at family dinners, and I'm starting to lose it. I'm 25, and my family gets together for dinner every Sunday at my parents' house. It's supposed to be this nice tradition where we all catch up and spend quality time together, but my brother Elias has turned it into his personal stage. Elias is 28, and he's one of those people who needs to be the centre of attention at all times. He can't stand when someone else is talking for more than 30 seconds without jumping in to redirect the conversation back to himself. Last Sunday was a perfect example of how bad this has gotten. I was telling my parents about a promotion I'd gotten at work. I'd been working toward this position for over a year, and I was really excited to share the news with my family. I got maybe 3 sentences out before Elias cut me off. "Speaking of work," he said, even though we weren't speaking of work in general, just my specific job situation, "I'm probably going to get promoted to senior manager next month." My boss basically told me it's a done deal. And just like that, the conversation shifted to Elias's job. My parents started asking him about his responsibilities and congratulating him on his upcoming promotion. My actual promotion that had already happened got completely forgotten. This happens every single week. I'll start talking about something that happened to me, and within minutes, Elias has somehow made it about himself. If I mention going on a date, he immediately launches into stories about his dating life. If I talk about a vacation I'm planning, he starts describing all the amazing trips he's taken recently. The worst part is how he does it. Elias doesn't just change the subject randomly. He finds these clever ways to connect whatever I'm saying to something about himself. So it seems like natural conversation flow. But it's not natural. It's calculated. A few weeks ago, I was telling everyone about my friend's wedding that I'd attended. I was describing the venue and how beautiful the ceremony was when Elias interrupted with, "That reminds me, I need to tell you guys about this wedding I went to last month." Then he spent the next 20 minutes describing every detail of his friend's wedding, which was apparently much more elaborate and expensive than the one I'd attended. By the time he finished talking, dinner was almost over, and the conversation had moved on to completely different topics. I never got to finish my story about my friend's wedding, and nobody seemed to notice or care. What makes this even more frustrating is that Elias doesn't just interrupt me, he interrupts everyone. But somehow, he's perfected this technique where he makes it seem like he's just enthusiastically participating in the conversation rather than hijacking it. When my mum was trying to tell us about her book club last week, Elias jumped in to recommend 3 books he thought were better than what they were currently reading. When my dad mentioned a problem he was having with his car, Elias immediately started giving advice based on his own car experiences, even though he knows nothing about automotive repair. But I seem to get interrupted more than anyone else, and I think it's because I'm the youngest and Elias sees me as the easiest target. He knows I won't call him out in front of our parents because I don't want to cause family drama. I've tried various strategies to deal with this. I've tried talking faster to get my thoughts out before he can interrupt. I've tried making my stories more engaging or dramatic to hold everyone's attention. I've even tried directly saying, "Let me finish my story first," but Elias just laughs it off and says he was just trying to contribute to the conversation. The most infuriating thing is that Elias is genuinely charming and funny when he wants to be. His stories are usually entertaining, and he knows how to work a room. So even when he's completely taking over the conversation, everyone enjoys listening to him. It's hard to be mad at someone for being too interesting, but I'm tired of feeling like a supporting character in my own family dinners. I have things to say too, experiences to share, opinions that matter, but I never get the chance to fully express myself because Elias is always waiting in the wings to take centre stage. Last Sunday, I decided to try a different approach. When Elias interrupted me while I was talking about a concert I'd gone to, I just stopped talking and waited. I figured if I made it obvious that he'd cut me off, maybe someone would notice and redirect the conversation back to me. But nobody did. Everyone just seamlessly transitioned to listening to Elias's story about a concert he'd attended years ago. It was like I'd never been speaking at all. I sat there in silence for the rest of dinner, feeling completely invisible in my own family. After dinner, my mum asked me if everything was okay because I seemed quiet. I told her I was fine, but internally I was screaming. How could she not notice that I'd barely spoken during the entire meal? How could none of them see that Elias dominates every single conversation? I'm starting to dread these family dinners. What used to be something I looked forward to has become this weekly reminder that my voice doesn't matter in my own family. Elias has trained everyone to expect that he'll be the main entertainment, and I've somehow become relegated to audience member status. That story comes to an end there. The systematic way Elias has conditioned his entire family to accept his conversation hijacking is masterful manipulation. He's turned every family dinner into his own personal talk show, where everyone else just gets to be part of the studio audience. Some people really can't stand sharing the spotlight for even 5 minutes. Moving into our next story, about someone whose definition of sharing food needs some serious adjustments. My friend ate my leftovers without asking, and now she thinks I'm overreacting. I'm 24 and I live with my roommates in a small apartment. We split groceries sometimes, but we generally keep our food separate because we have different diets and schedules. My friend Celine comes over pretty regularly to hang out, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. She's always been comfortable in my space, which I usually don't mind. She'll grab drinks from my fridge, use my bathroom, crash on my couch when she's too tired to drive home. I've always been okay with this because that's what friends do for each other. But lately, Selena has been taking liberties that are starting to bother me. Last week was the breaking point. I'd ordered Thai food for dinner and only ate about half of it. I put the leftovers in the fridge because I was planning to eat them for lunch the next day at work. This wasn't random food that might go bad. This was my planned meal for the following day. The next morning, I went to grab my leftovers and they were gone. The container was in the sink, completely empty. I asked my roommate if she'd eaten them, and she said no. Then I remembered that Selena had stayed late the night before, and I'd gone to bed while she was still watching Selena asking if she'd eaten my leftovers TV. When I texted, she responded with, "Oh yeah, I got hungry around midnight. You weren't going to eat them anyway, right?" That response really bothered me. First of all, how could she possibly know whether I was planning to eat them? And second, even if I wasn't, shouldn't she have asked before eating my food? It's basic courtesy to check with someone before consuming their leftovers. I told Selena that I'd actually been planning to take them to work for lunch, and now I'd have to figure out something else to eat. Her response was, "Sorry, I didn't know. But it's not that big a deal, you can just order more." But it is a big deal. I'm on a tight budget, and I don't just order food whenever I feel like it. Those leftovers were part of my meal planning for the week. Plus, it wasn't about the money as much as it was about the principle. You don't eat someone else's food without asking, period. This wasn't an isolated incident either. I started paying more attention to what happened to my food after Selena's visits. She'd eaten my yogurt that I was saving for breakfast. She'd finished off my bag of chips that I'd been snacking on throughout the week. She'd used my expensive coffee creamer without replacing it. When I brought up the pattern to Selena, she acted like I was being petty and possessive about food. She said that she thought we had the kind of friendship where we shared everything. She reminded me that she'd bought me drinks when we'd gone out together, like that somehow entitled her to raid my refrigerator. But there's a big difference between someone buying you a drink at a bar and someone eating your planned meals without permission. When Selena buys me drinks, it's usually when we're out together, and she's buying drinks for herself anyway. It's a social gesture. When she eats my food, she's taking something I specifically bought for myself and plan to consume later. What makes this worse is that Selena never brings food to share when she comes over. She'll show up empty-handed and then help herself to whatever I have available. If she's going to treat my kitchen like a communal space, the least she could do is contribute to the communal food supply. Last week, I decided to test whether Selena would notice if the situation was reversed. When I went to her place for movie night, I asked if I could have some of her ice cream that I saw in her freezer. Selena immediately said that she was saving it for later and offered me some crackers instead. So apparently, Selena understands food boundaries when it comes to her own belongings. But those same boundaries don't apply when she's at my place. It's this double standard that really gets to me. I tried having a serious conversation with Selena about this issue. I explained that I plan my meals carefully and that when she eats my food without asking, it messes up my whole system. I asked her to please check with me before taking anything from my kitchen. Selena's response was to get defensive and say that I was being weird about food. She said that most people don't care if their friends eat leftovers and that I was making a big deal out of nothing. She suggested that maybe I should label my food if I don't want people to eat it, but I shouldn't have to label food in my own apartment. This isn't a shared office refrigerator. This is my personal kitchen. The default assumption should be that food belongs to the person who bought it unless they explicitly offer to share. The most frustrating part is that Selena frames this as me being stingy or inhospitable. She acts like I'm violating some unspoken rule of friendship by not wanting her to eat my food without permission. But hospitality goes both ways. A good guest doesn't take advantage of their host's generosity. I've started hiding food that I specifically don't want Selena to eat, which is ridiculous. I shouldn't have to strategically store my groceries to prevent my friend from consuming them. But I got tired of planning meals around food that might not be there when I need it. The whole situation has made me less enthusiastic about having Selena over. I used to enjoy her spontaneous visits, But now I find myself mentally cataloguing what food I have and whether I can afford to lose any of it. That's not how friendship should feel. That story ends there. Celine has mastered the art of selective boundary recognition, understanding perfectly well that food belongs to people when it's hers, but somehow becoming confused about ownership when it's anyone else's kitchen. The entitlement to just assume leftovers are up for grabs, while simultaneously protecting her own ice cream, shows exactly how calculated this behaviour really is. Our next story involves a partner who seems to have trouble letting go of the past, literally. My partner still has photos of their ex on their phone, and I don't know how to feel about it. I'm 27, and I've been dating Juliet for about 8 months now. Things have been going really well between us, and we've started talking about moving in together and making our relationship more serious. Juliet was in a long-term relationship before me that ended about a year ago. She's been pretty open about the fact that it was a difficult breakup and that it took her some time to get over it. I've always appreciated her honesty about her past, and I thought it showed maturity that she could talk about previous relationships without being weird about it. A few weeks ago, we were looking through photos on Juliet's phone because she wanted to show me pictures from a work event she'd attended. As she was scrolling through her camera roll, I couldn't help but notice that there were still a lot of photos of her ex-boyfriend mixed in with everything else. I'm not talking about a few old photos that she forgot to delete. There were dozens of them, scattered throughout the past year. Pictures of them together, at restaurants, on vacation, at family gatherings, casual selfies, couple photos where they looked happy and in love. Some of these photos were taken just a few months before we started dating. What bothered me wasn't just that the photos existed, but that they were still actively saved in her camera roll alongside pictures of us. When Juliet showed me a photo from last month, I could see thumbnails of her and her ex right there in the same roll as pictures she'd taken of me. I tried to ignore it at first because I didn't want to seem jealous or controlling. Everyone has a past, and I understand that people don't necessarily delete every trace of previous relationships. But it started eating at me, especially because Juliet and I have been talking about getting more serious. A few days later, I brought it up as gently as I could. I told Juliet that I'd noticed she still had photos of her ex on her phone, and I asked how she felt about that. I tried to frame it as genuine curiosity rather than an accusation. Juliet's response was immediate defensiveness. She said that those photos were part of her life history and that she shouldn't have to erase her past just because she was in a new relationship. She asked me if I expected her to pretend that her previous relationship had never happened. I tried to explain that I wasn't asking her to pretend anything, but that keeping romantic photos of an ex while building a new relationship felt strange to me. I said it would be like me keeping love letters from a previous girlfriend in my bedside drawer. It's not about erasing history, it's about moving forward. Juliet insisted that the photos didn't mean anything to her anymore, that they were just images on her phone that she never looked at. If they didn't mean anything, I asked, then why not delete them? That's when she got more defensive and said I was being insecure and trying to control her. But here's what really bothered me about her response. If the photos truly didn't mean anything to her, wouldn't deleting them be easy? The fact that she was so resistant to getting rid of them suggested that maybe they did still hold some significance. I started paying more attention to how Juliet interacted with her phone around me. I noticed that she was more protective of it than she used to be, more likely to turn the screen away when she was scrolling through photos or social media. It felt like she was being secretive, which made me even more uncomfortable. A week later, we were at a restaurant, and Juliet wanted to take a selfie of us together. As she was setting up the photo, her ex's face appeared on the screen for a split second as she scrolled past one of their old pictures. It was this intimate moment where they were clearly happy together, and seeing it right before taking a photo with her felt awful. I asked Juliet again if she would consider moving those photos to a separate folder or cloud storage, somewhere they wouldn't pop up randomly when she was trying to take pictures with me. I thought this was a reasonable compromise that would let her keep the photos while making them less intrusive to our current relationship. Juliet refused and said I was being ridiculous. She said that if I trusted her, these photos shouldn't bother me. She turned it around and made it seem like my discomfort was a reflection of my own insecurity rather than a reasonable boundary. But trust isn't really the issue here. I don't think Juliet is cheating on me or planning to get back together with her ex. The issue is that constantly being reminded of her past relationship makes it harder for me to feel like I'm her priority in the present. When we take photos together and I see thumbnails of her with someone else, it reminds me that I'm not the first person she's felt this way about. When she's scrolling through her phone and pictures of them pop up, it feels like he's still present in our relationship in some way. I've tried to understand Juliet's perspective. Maybe she genuinely doesn't think about these photos and they really don't mean anything to her. But if that's the case, why is she so adamant about keeping them? And why does my discomfort with them seem to matter so little to her? The whole situation has created this underlying tension in our relationship. I feel like I'm being unreasonable for caring about this, but I also can't shake the feeling that Juliet isn't fully committed to moving forward with me. How can we build something new when she's literally surrounded by reminders of something old? That story ends there. Juliet's refusal to even consider a compromise speaks volumes about what those photos actually mean to her. If they truly held no significance, moving them to a separate folder would be effortless. Instead, she's chosen to protect them more fiercely than she's protecting her current partner's feelings. Some people keep their exes on life support through digital shrines and then act confused when it affects their new relationships. Let's move on to a story about family members who've perfected the art of disguising insults as compliments. My aunt always gives me backhanded compliments, and I'm tired of pretending they're nice. I'm 22, and my Aunt Ivy is one of those people who thinks she's being helpful by constantly commenting on everyone's appearance and life choices. She frames everything as concern or encouragement, but her words always leave me feeling worse about myself. Every time I see Ivy at family gatherings, she manages to find something to say that sounds like a compliment, but feels like a criticism. Last month at my cousin's graduation party, the first thing she said to me was, "Oh wow, you look so good. You must have lost some weight." On the surface, that seems like a nice thing to say, but the implication is that I didn't look good before, and that losing weight was necessary for me to be attractive. It's not actually a compliment about how I look now, it's a reminder that she thought I looked bad previously. This is Ivy's specialty. She'll say things like, "Your hair looks much better when you actually style it," or "That outfit is so flattering on you, you should dress up more often." Every positive comment comes with an embedded criticism of my usual appearance or choices. At Christmas dinner, Ivy told me I was finally starting to look more mature. When I asked what she meant, she said it was good that I was growing out of that awkward phase. I'm 22 years old. What awkward phase was I supposed to be growing out of at this point in my life? The worst part is that Ivy delivers these comments with this big smile and enthusiastic tone, like she's doing me a favour by pointing out my improvements. She acts like she's being supportive and encouraging, but the subtext is always that I was somehow deficient before. Last week at a family barbecue, Ivy saw me talking to my cousin's friend and came over to join the conversation. After the friend walked away, Ivy said, "You're getting so much better at talking to people. You used to be so shy and awkward." Again, it sounds like a compliment, but what she's really saying is that she thought I was shy and awkward before, and that my social skills were previously lacking. Instead of just saying something nice about how I interacted with someone, she had to reference what she perceived as my past failures. I've started dreading interactions with Ivy because I never know what aspect of myself she's going to critique while pretending to praise me. She comments on my clothes, my hair, my weight, my social skills, my career choices, always in this way that sounds supportive but feels judgmental. When I got my first job after college, Ivy said, "I'm so proud of you for finding something. I was worried you'd have trouble in the job market." She couldn't just congratulate me on my new position. She had to remind me that she doubted my employability. The most infuriating thing is that when I've tried to address this with other family members, they tell me I'm being too sensitive. They say Ivy means well and is just trying to be encouraging. But encouragement shouldn't make you feel bad about yourself. My mum always defends Ivy by saying that's just how she talks, that she doesn't mean anything by it. But intent doesn't matter if the impact is negative. Whether Ivy realizes it or not, her comments consistently make me feel criticized and judged. I've tried different approaches to dealing with this. I've tried ignoring her comments completely, but Ivy keeps making them whether I respond or not. I've tried saying thank you and changing the subject, but she often follows up with more detailed analysis of whatever improvement she thinks she's identified. A few months ago, I tried addressing it directly. When Ivy told me I was looking so much healthier, I asked her what she meant by that. She got flustered and said she was just trying to give me a compliment. When I explained that her comments often made me feel bad, she acted hurt and said she was only trying to be supportive. But if Ivy really wanted to be supportive, she could learn to give compliments that don't require putting down my past self. She could say, "You look great," instead of "You look great now." She could say, "I like your hair," instead of "Your hair looks better when you do it this way." The pattern is so consistent that I've started to wonder if Ivy even realizes she's doing it. Maybe she genuinely thinks she's being helpful by acknowledging my supposed improvements. But the effect is that I feel like she's been keeping a running mental list of everything she thought was wrong with me. What makes this particularly frustrating is that Ivy never seems to notice when other people look good or do well without comparing it to how they used to look or perform. Her compliments are exclusively focused on perceived improvements, never just appreciation for how someone is in the present moment. I've started limiting my interactions with Ivy as much as possible. At family events, I try to stay busy helping with food or talking to other relatives so she doesn't have opportunities to corner me with her observations about my personal development. But avoiding her completely isn't really an option since we're family and she's at every gathering. I just wish I could enjoy spending time with my relatives without worrying about which aspect of my appearance or personality Ivy is going to analyse and compare to some previous version of myself that apparently wasn't good enough. That story is finished. Ivy has weaponized encouragement, turning every interaction into a performance review where she gets to play both the critic and the cheerleader. The fact that she genuinely seems to think she's being helpful makes it even more insidious because she's created a system where calling her out makes you look ungrateful for her support. Now let's dive into a story about someone who clearly has very different ideas about friendship loyalty. My friend left my birthday party early to go somewhere cooler. I'm 26 and I spent weeks planning my birthday party this year. I booked a private room at this restaurant I really like, invited about 15 of my closest friends, and was genuinely excited to celebrate with everyone who mattered to me. Theo has been one of my best friends since high school. We've been through everything together. Breakups, job changes, family drama, all of it. He was one of the first people I invited, and he seemed excited about coming. He even asked if he could bring anything and offered to help me set up. The party was going really well. Everyone showed up on time, the food was great, and people seemed to be having fun. We were maybe 2 hours into the evening when Theo's phone started buzzing constantly. He kept checking it and looking distracted, but I figured it was just work stuff or family messages. Around 9 p.m, right when we were about to do the cake, Theo came over to me with this apologetic expression. He pulled me aside and said he was really sorry, but he'd just gotten invited to this exclusive party across town. He said it was this industry event that could be really good for his career, and he felt like he couldn't pass it up. I was confused because Theo works in marketing, and this was a Saturday night. What kind of career-boosting event happens on Saturday night during someone's birthday party? But I tried to be understanding. I told him I was disappointed, but that I got it if this was really important for work. That's when Theo made it worse. He said it wasn't exactly a work thing, but that there were going to be some really influential people there, and the party was supposed to be amazing. He started describing the venue and the guest list like he was trying to convince me that this other party was objectively better than mine. Then he said the thing that really hurt. He looked around at my party and said, "Don't get me wrong, this is nice, but that party's going to be legendary. I'll probably never get another chance to go to something like that." He said this loud enough that several other people heard him. My other friends looked uncomfortable, and I could see them exchanging glances. Here I was, celebrating my birthday with people I cared about, and Theo was basically announcing that he'd found something better to do. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell him to just go, but another part of me was really hurt that he was prioritizing some random party over my birthday. We'd been planning this for weeks, and he was treating it like a consolation prize. Theo must have seen the look on my face because he tried to backtrack. He said he'd stay for the cake and then leave, like that was some kind of compromise. But at that point, I just wanted him to go. Having him there while he was clearly thinking about somewhere else, he'd rather be felt worse than having him leave. So Theo stayed for exactly 10 minutes of cake time, took a few pictures for social media, and then made this big show of saying goodbye to everyone. He hugged me and said we'd celebrate properly later, just the two of us, like that somehow made up for ditching my actual birthday party. After he left, the energy of the party completely shifted. People kept asking where Theo had gone, and I had to explain that he'd left for another party. Some of my friends seemed offended on my behalf, but others looked like they were wondering if they were missing out on something better too. The worst part was that I spent the rest of my own birthday party thinking about whether it was boring. Was the other party really that much better? Were my friends having a good time? Or were they just being polite? Theo had planted this seed of doubt that made me question everything about my own celebration. The next morning, Theo posted stories on social media from the party he'd gone to. It looked like a typical house party with loud music and people drinking. Nothing particularly legendary or career-changing. Just a regular party that happened to conflict with mine. When I saw those posts, I realised that Theo hadn't left my party for some amazing opportunity. He'd left because he thought the other party would be more fun, and he was willing he didn't miss out. To hurt my feelings to make sure I confronted Theo about it a few days later. He seemed genuinely surprised that I was upset. He said he thought I'd understand, that he wanted to make the most of his weekend, and that we could celebrate my birthday anytime. He acted like birthdays weren't that important once you're in your 20s. But that completely missed the point. It wasn't about the birthday itself. It was about the fact that he'd made plans with me, let me count on him being there, and then abandoned those plans the moment something that seemed more exciting came along. Theo keeps acting like I'm overreacting about this. He suggested we go out for drinks to make up for it, but he doesn't seem to understand that the damage is already done. It's not about missing one party. It's about realising that our friendship isn't as important to him as I thought it was. Now I keep wondering if Theo has always been like this, and I just never noticed. How many times has he been mentally comparing our hangouts to other things he could be doing? How many times has he stayed with me only because he didn't have a better option? That story's over. The public announcement that he was leaving for something legendary is what makes this particularly brutal. Theo didn't just abandon his friend, he made sure everyone knew he was trading up to a better party. Some people really can't resist ranking their social options out loud. Moving into our next story, about family members who don't understand personal boundaries. My sibling takes my clothes without asking. I'm 24, and I still live at home while I'm saving money for my own place. My younger brother Samir is 21, and he's gotten into this habit of just taking my clothes whenever he feels like it. It started small. I'd notice one of my hoodies was missing, or a t-shirt I wanted to wear wasn't in my closet. When I'd ask Samir about it, he'd say he borrowed it and forgot to mention it. He'd always give it back eventually, so I didn't make a big deal about it at first. But over the past few months, it's gotten completely out of control. Samir treats my entire wardrobe like his personal shopping mall. He'll go into my room when I'm not there and just take whatever he wants to wear that day. The problem isn't just that he takes my clothes. It's how he treats them when he has them. Samir is bigger than me, so when he wears my shirts, they get stretched out. When he wears my jeans, they come back baggy in weird places. He's essentially ruining my clothes by wearing them. Last week, I was getting ready for a job interview and went to grab my favourite button-down shirt. It wasn't in my closet. I found it in Samir's room, wrinkled on his floor, with what looked like coffee stains on the front. He'd worn it out the night before and just thrown it on the ground when he got home. When I confronted him about it, Samir acted like I was being unreasonable. He said it was just a shirt and that he'd wash it for me. But that wasn't the point. The point was that he'd taken something of mine without asking and then treated it carelessly. This happens constantly now. I'll be looking for specific clothes for work or social events, and they'll be missing because Samir decided he wanted to wear them. Sometimes I don't find them until days later, usually in his room or mixed in with his laundry. The most frustrating part is that Samir has plenty of his own clothes. His closet is full of shirts, jeans, hoodies, everything he could possibly need. But for some reason, he's decided that my clothes are better or more interesting than his own. I've tried hiding clothes that I definitely don't want him to take, but Samir always seems to find them. I've started keeping important items in my car or at friends' houses, which is ridiculous. I shouldn't have to hide my own clothes from my brother. When I brought this up with my parents, they said it was typical sibling behaviour and that we needed to work it out ourselves. But this isn't normal borrowing between siblings. This is Samir helping himself to my personal property without any regard for my feelings or my schedule. The worst incident was when I had a date and wanted to wear this specific dress that I really liked. I'd planned my whole outfit around it, even bought new shoes to match. When I went to get dressed, the dress was gone. I found it in Samir's girlfriend's car because he'd let her borrow it without asking me. So not only was Samir taking my clothes, he was giving them to other people to wear. When I explained how upset I was, he said I was being selfish and that clothes were meant to be shared. But sharing implies mutual agreement, not one person just taking whatever they want. I've tried locking my bedroom door, but Samir somehow always finds a way in when I'm not home. He knows my schedule well enough to avoid getting caught in the act. By the time I realise something is missing, he's already worn it and usually gotten it dirty or stretched out. The whole situation has made me paranoid about my own belongings. I find myself constantly checking my closet to see what's missing. I've started taking inventory of my clothes so I know exactly what Samir has taken and when. What makes this even more irritating is that Samir never asks to borrow my clothes when I'm around. He only takes them when I'm at work or out with friends. It's like he knows what he's doing is wrong, but he does it anyway, because he thinks I won't notice, or won't make a big enough fuss to stop him. I've considered just taking his clothes in retaliation, but that would make me just as bad as him. Plus his clothes don't fit me properly, so it wouldn't even be effective revenge. That story wraps up there. The calculated sneakiness of only taking clothes when his sibling isn't around shows Samir knows exactly what he's doing wrong. He's basically running a one-person clothing rental business using someone else's wardrobe as inventory. The audacity of lending out borrowed clothes to his girlfriend takes this to a whole different level of entitlement. Our next situation involves a friend who has absolutely no filter when it comes to movie experiences. My friend always spoils movie endings. I'm 25 and I love going to movies. It's one of my favourite ways to relax and escape from everyday stress. My friend Mira also enjoys movies, and we used to have this great tradition of seeing new releases together on weekends. But over the past year, Mira has developed this incredibly annoying habit of spoiling movies right before we watch them. Not accidentally, but deliberately, like she can't help herself from sharing whatever she knows about the plot. The first time it happened, I thought it was just a mistake. We were about to see this thriller that had just come out, and as we were walking into the theatre, Mira said, "I read online that the main character dies at the end." She said it so casually, like she was commenting on the weather. I was stunned. The movie hadn't even started, and she just ruined the entire experience for me. When I asked her why she told me that, Mira seemed confused by my reaction. She said she thought I'd want to know so I could watch for clues throughout the movie. But that's not how movies work. The whole point of a thriller is not knowing what's going to happen. Half the enjoyment comes from being surprised by plot twists and unexpected developments. Mira had essentially stolen that experience from me before the opening credits even rolled. I tried to explain this to her, but Mira didn't seem to understand why spoilers bothered me. She said that knowing the ending actually made movies more interesting because you could see how the filmmakers set everything up. She acted like she was doing me a favour by giving me inside information. A few weeks later, we went to see a comedy that I'd been looking forward to for months. Right as we were sitting down with our popcorn, Mira started telling me about all the funniest scenes she'd seen in online clips. She basically recounted the entire movie's best moments before it even started. Again, I asked her to stop, but Mira said she was just trying to get me excited about what we were about to see. She couldn't understand that hearing about the funny parts ahead of time made them less funny when they actually happened on screen. This pattern has continued with every movie we've tried to see together. Horror movies, romantic comedies, action films, it doesn't matter what genre. Mira always has some piece of information that she absolutely has to share right before we watch. For a superhero movie, she told me which characters were going to die. For a romantic comedy, she explained the entire misunderstanding that drives the plot. For a mystery, she revealed who the killer was before we even bought our tickets. The worst part is that Mira seeks out this information deliberately. She's not accidentally stumbling across spoilers. She actively reads reviews, watches trailer breakdowns, and looks up plot summaries before going to movies. Then she can't resist sharing what she's learned. I've tried different approaches to deal with this. I've asked her not to research movies before we see them together. I've suggested we avoid discussing the plot until after the credits roll. I've even tried showing up to the theatre at the last possible minute, so she doesn't have time to spoil anything. Nothing works. Mira always finds a way to share some crucial plot point right when it will have maximum impact on my viewing experience. Sometimes she does it while we're buying tickets. Sometimes it's during the previews. Once she actually whispered a major twist to me during the climactic scene, just to confirm that she'd been right about what was going to happen. When I finally told Mira that I couldn't watch movies with her anymore because of the spoiler issue, she got defensive. She said I was being too sensitive and that knowing what happens shouldn't ruin the experience of watching something well made. But that's exactly what it does. When you know the main character survives, you don't feel the same tension during dangerous scenes. When you know the couple ends up together, the romantic obstacles feel meaningless. When you know who the villain is, the mystery becomes pointless. Mira acts like my reaction to spoilers is some kind of character flaw, like I should be mature enough to enjoy movies, even when I know exactly what's going to happen. She says that truly great films are still good even when you know the plot, which might be true for some people, but that's not how I experience movies. I've started going to movies by myself or with other friends who understand basic spoiler etiquette. It's disappointing because Mira and I used to have fun at movies together, but she's made it impossible for me to enjoy the experience when she's there. The most frustrating thing is that Mira seems genuinely confused about why this bothers me so much. She acts like she's trying to enhance my movie experience by sharing information, when actually she's destroying it. Some people really can't understand that not everyone wants to know everything ahead of time. That story is over. Mira has turned movie watching into a bizarre form of torture, where she systematically destroys every surprise before it can happen. The fact that she actively seeks out spoilers just to share them shows this isn't absent-mindedness, it's a compulsive need to demonstrate her knowledge at the expense of everyone else's enjoyment. Let's move to our next story about someone whose idea of emotional support needs some serious recalibration. My partner laughs at me when I try a new hobby. I'm 28 and I've always been interested in trying different creative activities. Over the past year, I've experimented with pottery, watercolor painting, and most recently, learning to play the ukulele. I'm not trying to become a professional artist or musician. I just enjoy the process of learning new skills and having creative outlets. My partner Jonah has a very different personality. He's practical, logical, and tends to focus on things that have clear, measurable outcomes. He's never been particularly interested in creative pursuits, which is fine. We don't have to share every interest. But Jonah's reaction to my hobbies has started to really bother me. Every time I try something new, he treats it like it's adorable, but ultimately pointless. When I signed up for a pottery class, he said, "That's so cute that you want to make little bowls." When I started painting, he called it my art phase, like it was something I'd outgrow. The way he says these things isn't overtly mean, but there's always this undertone of condescension. He speaks to me like I'm a child playing dress-up, rather than an adult exploring interests. It's this subtle mockery disguised as affection. When I started learning ukulele, Jonah's reaction was even worse. He laughed when he saw me practicing and said, "Oh, you're really going for it, aren't you?" He made it sound like learning an instrument was some kind of ridiculous overreach on my part. Every time I practice, Jonah makes little comments. If I mess up a chord, he'll chuckle and say something like, "Getting the hang of it yet?" If I play a song successfully, he'll say, "That's actually not terrible," like he's surprised I managed to accomplish anything. The worst part is that Jonah frames all of this as support. He says he thinks it's sweet that I'm trying new things. He acts like his amusement is endearing rather than discouraging. When I've tried to explain that his comments hurt my feelings, he says he's just teasing and that I shouldn't be so sensitive. But there's a difference between playful teasing and subtle undermining. Jonah never encourages my progress or shows genuine interest in what I'm learning. He never asks to see my paintings or hear a song I've been practicing. He just makes these dismissive little jokes that chip away at my confidence. A few weeks ago, I was really excited because I'd finally mastered a song on the ukulele that I'd been working on for weeks. I asked Jonah if he wanted to hear it, and he said, "Sure, let's hear your little performance." The way he said "little performance" made it clear that he didn't expect much. I played the song, and I actually did pretty well. I didn't make any major mistakes, and I felt proud of how much I'd improved. When I finished, Jonah clapped slowly and said, "Wow, that was almost like a real song." Ish, he was smiling, but the comment felt like a backhanded compliment. I told Jonah that his reaction made me feel bad, and he seemed genuinely surprised. He said he was trying to be supportive and that he thought I'd appreciate his honesty about my skill level. He acted like crushing my enthusiasm was somehow helpful. But I wasn't asking for harsh critiques of my technical abilities. I was sharing something I was proud of with someone I cared about, hoping for basic encouragement and emotional support. Instead, I got this analysis of why my efforts weren't quite good enough. The pattern is consistent across all my hobbies. Jonah never outright tells me to stop, but he makes it clear that he thinks my interests are frivolous and my progress is amusing rather than impressive. It's death by 1,000 tiny dismissals. I've started practicing ukulele when Jonah isn't home because I got tired of his running commentary. I've stopped showing him my paintings because I know he'll find some way to diminish them while pretending to be complimentary. I'm essentially hiding my hobbies from my own partner. When I brought this up directly, Jonah said he was just being realistic about my abilities and that he didn't want me to get disappointed when I realized I wasn't naturally talented at these things. He framed his discouragement as protection, like he was saving me from future letdown. But that's not his decision to make. Even if I'm never going to be a great musician or artist, that doesn't mean I can't enjoy the process of learning and creating. Jonah has appointed himself the judge of whether my hobbies are worthwhile, and he's consistently ruling against them. The whole situation has made me less enthusiastic about trying new things. I find myself second-guessing my interests and wondering if Jonah is right, that I'm just wasting time on activities I'll never be good at. His constant, subtle mockery has gotten into my head and made me more self-conscious about exploring creativity. That story concludes there. Jonah has perfected the art of crushing someone's spirit while maintaining plausible deniability about his intentions. He's systematically destroying his partner's confidence in pursuing joy and growth, all while pretending he's being helpful and realistic. That's not honesty, that's emotional sabotage with a smile. Our next story deals with someone who has mastered the art of strategic friendship management. My friend uses me as a backup plan. I'm 26 and I've been friends with Clint for about 3 years. We met at work and initially had a great friendship. We'd hang out regularly, grab drinks after work, spend weekends exploring the city together. I genuinely enjoyed his company and thought the feeling was mutual, but over the past year, I've started to notice a pattern in how Clint treats our friendship. He only makes plans with me when his other friends are unavailable, and he's not subtle about it. Clint will text me on Friday afternoons asking what I'm doing that weekend, but only after his preferred friends have already declined whatever he had in mind. I know this because he'll say things like, "My buddies from college are all busy this weekend, want to check out that new bar," or "The guys can't make it to the game, you interested?" At first I didn't mind being his second choice occasionally. Everyone has closer friends, and I figured it was natural that he'd try his first tier friends before moving down the list. But it's become clear that I'm permanently relegated to backup status in Clint's social hierarchy. The most obvious example was his birthday party last month. Clint invited me 3 days before the event, after he'd already invited everyone else. When I asked why he'd waited so long to invite me, he said he wasn't sure how many people he could fit at the restaurant and wanted to see who else could make it first. But when I got to the party, it was clear that wasn't true. The restaurant had plenty of space, and several people there had been invited weeks in advance. Clint had simply waited to see if more desirable guests would fill up his party before extending invitations to people like me. This pattern extends to all our interactions. Clint never makes definitive plans with me in advance. Instead, he keeps me on standby for whenever his primary social options fall through. I'll get texts like, "If nothing else comes up, want to grab dinner tonight?" Or, "Looks like I'm free this afternoon, you around?" The language he uses makes it clear that spending time with me is what he does when he has nothing better available. I'm not a friend he's excited to see. I'm a fallback option for when his preferred plans don't materialize. What makes this more frustrating is that Clint expects me to always be available when he reaches out. If I'm busy when he texts at the last minute, he acts disappointed and says we should hang out soon. But then he doesn't follow up or make concrete plans. He just waits until his other friends are unavailable again. A few weeks ago, Clint invited me to a concert about an hour before it started. He said he had an extra ticket because someone had bailed. I was already committed to dinner with my family, so I had to decline. The next day, Clint seemed annoyed and made comments about how we never hang out anymore. But we never hang out anymore because Clint only invites me to things at the last minute, when I might already have other commitments. If he actually wanted to spend time with me, he'd plan ahead and make me a priority instead of an afterthought. I've tested this theory by trying to make plans with Clint in advance. When I suggest specific activities for upcoming weekends, he always says he'll have to check his schedule and get back to me. He never does, but then he'll text me that same weekend asking if I'm free because his original plans fell through. The most telling incident was when Clint invited me to a sports bar to watch a game. I was excited because it felt like he was actually choosing to spend time with me. But when we got there, it became obvious that he'd invited me because the friends he really wanted to watch with had made plans without him. Throughout the game, Clint kept checking his phone and texting other people. He seemed distracted and disappointed to be there with me instead of wherever his other friends were. It felt like I was keeping him company while he waited for better options to become available. I've started declining Clint's last-minute invitations because I'm tired of being treated like a consolation prize. When he texts, asking if I'm free that evening, I tell him I have other plans even if I don't. I'd rather spend time alone than feel like someone's backup entertainment option. Since I've become less available, Clint has started making comments about how I've gotten busier and we should make more effort to stay in touch. But he's not making any effort himself. He's just noticed that his reliable backup plan isn't as reliable anymore. The whole situation has made me realize that Clint doesn't actually value our friendship. He values having me available when he needs someone to hang out with. There's a big difference between being someone's friend and being their emergency social contact. I've started investing more time in friendships with people who actually want to spend time with me, not just people who see me as better than being alone. It's amazing how much better social interactions feel when you know the other person is genuinely happy to be there with you. That story ends there. Clint has turned friendship into a reservation system where some people get priority booking and others get called when there are last-minute cancellations. The fact that he expects constant availability while offering zero commitment shows he fundamentally misunderstands what friendship actually means. Moving on to our next story about family members who can't let anyone else have their moment in the spotlight. My cousin tried to make my wedding about them. I'm 29 and I got married last month after planning for over a year. My wedding was supposed to be this beautiful celebration of my relationship with my partner, but my cousin Noelle managed to turn significant portions of it into her own personal performance. Noelle has always been dramatic and attention-seeking, but I thought she'd be able to contain herself for one day. I was wrong. The problem started during the rehearsal dinner when Noelle stood up to give what she called an impromptu toast. I hadn't asked her to speak, and she wasn't part of the wedding party, but she grabbed the microphone anyway. Her toast turned into a 15-minute speech about her own relationship history and how my wedding had inspired her to reflect on love and commitment. She barely mentioned me or my partner. Instead, she used our rehearsal dinner as an opportunity to process her own romantic life in front of 40 people. When she finally finished, everyone applauded politely, but I could see confused looks around the room. Several people asked me later if Noelle was supposed to give a speech because it seemed like she'd just decided to take over the microphone for her own purposes. The actual wedding day was worse. Noelle showed up wearing a dress that was almost identical to my bridesmaids' dresses, but in white. When I asked her about it, she said she thought it would be nice to coordinate with the wedding party since she felt so close to me. But the effect was that she looked like an additional bride rather than a guest. During the ceremony, Noelle positioned herself in the front row, even though that seating was reserved for immediate family. When my aunt tried to suggest she move back a row, Noelle said she needed to be close because she was so emotional about the wedding. She spent the entire ceremony dabbing at her eyes with tissues and making little sobbing noises that were audible to everyone nearby. At the reception, Noelle immediately started introducing herself to my partner's family as practically a sister to the bride. She told elaborate stories about our childhood that made it sound like we'd been inseparable growing up, even though we'd only seen each other occasionally at family gatherings. But the worst part came during the dancing portion of the evening. I was having my first dance with my new spouse when Noelle started taking photos with the flash on from directly beside the dance floor. She was positioning herself to get in the background of our romantic moment, essentially photobombing our first dance. When the DJ opened the floor for everyone to join us, Noelle immediately jumped in and started doing these elaborate dance moves that drew everyone's attention away from me and my partner. She was spinning, dipping, doing moves that clearly required dance training and making sure everyone was watching her instead of the newlyweds. Later, when it was time for the bouquet toss, Noelle pushed her way to the front of the group of single women and made this huge show of stretching and preparing like she was about to compete in the Olympics. When she caught the bouquet, she held it above her head and did a victory dance that lasted almost 2 minutes while everyone watched. Then she grabbed the DJ's microphone and announced that catching the bouquet was a sign that she was ready to find love again after her recent breakup. She started talking about what she was looking for in a partner and how my wedding had given her hope for her own romantic future. By this point, I was furious, but I didn't want to cause a scene at my own wedding. My maid of honor eventually convinced the DJ to move on to the next song, but Noelle had managed to turn my bouquet toss into her own personal dating advertisement. Throughout the evening, Noelle kept finding ways to insert herself into important moments. When we were cutting the cake, she positioned herself right next to us for photos. When we were saying goodbye to elderly relatives, she jumped into conversations to share her own thoughts about marriage and commitment. The photographer later told me that Noelle had approached him multiple times, asking him to take specific photos of her throughout the reception. She'd been essentially commissioning her own photo shoot at my wedding, using my photographer and my celebration as a backdrop for her own glamour shots. What made this especially frustrating was that other guests started commenting on Noelle's behaviour. Several people asked me if she was okay, because her level of involvement seemed unusual for a cousin. Some people seemed genuinely confused about whether Noelle had some special role in the wedding that they didn't understand. When I finally confronted Noelle about her behaviour, she acted completely innocent. She said she was just so happy for me that she couldn't contain her excitement. She claimed that everything she'd done was out of love and support for my marriage. But there's a difference between being excited for someone and making their special day about yourself. Noelle had systematically found ways to redirect attention to herself throughout the entire wedding weekend. She turned my celebration into her stage. The most infuriating part is that Noelle still doesn't seem to understand what she did wrong. She keeps talking about how beautiful the wedding was and how honoured she felt to be such an important part of my special day. She's rewritten the narrative in her mind so that her attention-grabbing behaviour becomes evidence of how much she cares about me. Looking at my wedding photos now, Noelle appears in about half of them, often positioned prominently or making dramatic expressions that draw focus away from me and my partner. What should have been documentation of our day has become a record of Noelle's performance. That story's over. Noelle essentially treated someone else's wedding like her own personal reality show audition. The white dress, the microphone grabbing, the dance floor theatrics, she hit every possible attention-seeking milestone while maintaining that it was all about love and support. Some people really can't let anyone else be the star for even one day. Let's move to a story about someone whose approach to friendship hospitality is remarkably one-sided. My friend never brings snacks but eats all of mine. I'm 27 and I love hosting people at my apartment. I enjoy cooking for friends, putting together cheese boards, making sure everyone has drinks and snacks when they come over. It's one of the ways I show care for the people in my life. My friend Ethan comes over probably twice a week, and he's always enthusiastic about the food I provide. He'll compliment my cooking, ask for recipes, and generally act like he appreciates the effort I put into feeding people, but he never ever brings anything himself. At first I didn't think much of it. Not everyone likes to cook or feels comfortable bringing food to other people's places. I figured Ethan just preferred to contribute in other ways, maybe by helping with dishes or offering to pay for takeout sometimes. But Ethan doesn't do any of those things either. He shows up empty-handed, eats whatever I've prepared, and then leaves without offering to help clean up or contribute to the next gathering. He treats my apartment like an all-inclusive restaurant, where everything is provided for his convenience. The pattern became really obvious when I started paying attention to how much food Ethan consumed compared to other friends. When I put out a cheese board for 4 people, Ethan will eat at least half of it himself. When I make a batch of cookies for a group, he'll take several and then ask if he can take some home for later. Last week was particularly egregious. I'd spent the afternoon making homemade pizza for a small group of friends. I'd bought expensive ingredients, made the dough from scratch, prepared multiple toppings so everyone could customize their portions. It was probably 3 hours of work total. Ethan arrived first and immediately started eating the pizza before anyone else got there. By the time the other friends arrived, he'd finished almost 2 entire pizzas by himself. When I mentioned that maybe we should save some for the others, Ethan said he didn't realize I was rationing the food, but I wasn't rationing anything. I was just trying to make sure there was enough for everyone I'd invited. Ethan had essentially eaten other people's portions because he couldn't control himself around free food. The worst part is that Ethan acts like my cooking and hospitality are just normal features of spending time at my place. He doesn't seem to recognize that I'm going out of my way to provide food and drinks. He treats it like it's my job as the host, rather than a generous gesture I choose to make. And that's where we'll wrap up tonight's collection of stories from the internet. If you've made it this far, you've probably recognized a few of these behaviors in people you know. Or maybe you've been on the receiving end of some similar situations yourself. These stories remind us that we're all dealing with the same kinds of frustrating people and awkward social dynamics, whether it's boundary-crossing friends, attention-seeking family members, or partners who somehow forget how to show basic consideration. The good news is, you're definitely not alone in dealing with these types of situations. The bad news is, these people are everywhere, and they're probably not going to change anytime soon. Sweet dreams, and I'll catch you in the next one.